Good evening from Westminster, slightly earlier indeed than we anticipated. This is Mark Darcy and Dr Ruth Fox of the Hansard Society with live commentary. MPs have taken control in a precedent-shattering move of the House of Commons agenda. They're voting now on the future of Brexit. This is a new method that they're using tonight. They're not filing through the dispatch boxes in the usual way, voting aye or nay to different ideas. They're filling out ballot papers, and the idea is not so much to generate some majority for one thing or the other in the future of Brexit, but to try and find out where, as it were, the centre of gravity in the House of Commons is, where opinion might begin to coalesce, where a critical mass bit might begin to form, and where the long deadlock around the future of Brexit might possibly be ended. Ruth Fox, this is a pretty unusual method they're using tonight, but it's not as unprecedented as some people have been suggesting, the actual method of voting.
No, it's not. I mean, the House has, well, actually both Houses of Parliament have used indicative votes in the past. There's at least 6 occasions where they have had this kind of approach to vote on a range of options, yes, no. What's unusual about this, I think, perhaps, is most specifically, is that it's not the government doing this. So in the past, for example, most famously in 2003 and again in 2007 on House of Lords reform, it was the government that was putting up the options, and it was the government that was laying the motion, and it was the government that was the minister that was speaking from the dispatch box to open the debate. What we've seen today is very different.
So, yeah, I mean, the really big difference here today is that MPs themselves, rather than government ministers, are driving this process. So whereas in the past you'd have had, as it were, pre-cooked options laid before them by the government to choose between, this time there's a bit more shake and bake about the proceedings. They've come up with a whole range of options that they are going to be considering, but those are generated by individual groups of MPs working up particular sets of ideas. And I think it's probably worth talking through some of the propositions that are now before the House. The first one that's been selected by the Speaker, and there's quite a list selected by Mr Speaker, is option B. This is from the Conservative John Barron, a long-standing Brexiteer, which is one of the simplest, which is just leave the EU without a deal on the newly anointed Brexit day of April the 12th. And so that is absolutely straightforward. There's not much room there for any doubt about what he means or how it might be interpreted. Some of the others, when we get beyond that, get a little bit more complicated, because there are all sorts of overlapping European institutions that Britain might decide that it wants to sign up to in the future, each of which comes with their own sets of rights and obligations about whether, for example, you accept free movement of people in one but not in another. And so that's where the list gets a bit more complicated, starting with option D. Now, this is the proposition from another Conservative, former Minister Nick Boles, Common Market 2.0 or stroke Norway Plus, as it's sometimes described. So what's the basis of that, Ruth?
Well, the essence of it is stay in the customs union, stay in the single market. That's the sort of the heart of what they're proposing. It's got cross-party support, so you've got Nick Boles, still a Conservative MP, although he's resigned from his association in Grantham. You've got leading Labour MPs like Stephen Kinnock and Lucy Powell, MP for Harlow Robert Halfon supporting this. So you've got a mix of political support across the spectrum, and essentially, this will involve joining the European Free Trade Association. So we would be joining an organisation that has in it 4 other members, which would be Norway, Switzerland, Iceland and Liechtenstein.
So we're bigger than the rest of them put together, and
yes, and that's one of the big issues for, it's not just a unilateral decision that we can make. They will have a voice in this process, and obviously we are an awful lot bigger than they are. So I think that they will have concerns about what that means for them and for the future of EFTA. You have to have free movement, but there's a debate about what kind of controls you could put on free movement.
So if you think Brexit means an end to unrestricted EU immigration, this doesn't provide that?
It might, certainly not unrestricted, but it's possible that you could utilise some controls.
Sort of emergency brakes built in.
Yes, there's sort of the argument that the government already could have been using some of these brakes that already exist within our membership of the EU, but haven't. And you have to have also the other free movement in terms of goods, services and capital as well as people. And
there's a not entirely dissimilar process is option 8, which comes from another Conservative ex-minister, the former Fisheries Minister George Eustace. And this is the Norway option minus membership of a customs union. And so, again, it keeps freedom of movement, for example, but it is a little bit different from the Nick Bowles proposition.
Yeah, I mean, without having the customs union, it means you've got the control in terms of setting tariffs, for example. You've still got the four freedoms issue and freedom of movement. And there would still be issues about the backstop in terms of you'd still need some kind of customs border. So the border would have to go somewhere. So the Northern Ireland issue, perhaps many people say, not entirely resolved by this approach.
Then we've got option J, and this is a proposal spearheaded by the father of the House, Ken Clarke, the veteran Conservative, former Chancellor, former Home Secretary, former Justice Secretary. He's been around in Conservative governments. I think he was first a minister in the 1970s under Edward Heath, so he's a real political veteran. His proposal is to leave the EU but stay in a customs union with it. So again, this is another sort of graduation or subtle gradient away from what, for example, George Eustice or Nick Bowles were proposing.
Yes, so you couldn't have your external tariff policy. That would be dealt with at the EU level, but it would help to address the issues of free movement because you wouldn't have to have free movement. So you could get rid of tariffs on goods and so on. It doesn't do anything in terms of services, in terms of financial services. So that there's an argument this is quite a good solution for the car manufacturers, but a less good solution for the City of London, for example. And on its own, it doesn't necessarily solve the backstop.
And then we come to the big Labour proposal. Jeremy Corbyn has an amendment down which is basically described as Labour's Brexit plan, customs union plus alignment on future EU rights, that's workers' rights, for example, and on EU regulations. Talk us through that.
Well, they're looking at it would require fairly wholesale changes to the withdrawal agreement as well as the political declaration on the future relationship that the government has negotiated. I mean, there's an argument that says this is very, very close to EU membership, wanting a lot of the advantages of EU membership. So they talk about wanting to, keep the European arrest warrant, to be involved in some of the sort of security and policing issues. They talk about joint institutions and joint mechanisms. It's not very clear what those would be. I think, from the perspective of the EU, it's who knows what they would say, but the perspective would be, well, you're a third country or you're not. And I think the concern would be that there's an element of wanting to have too many of the good aspects of the European Union that you like, whilst things like freedom of movement that cause you difficulties you're sort of putting aside.
Back to the dreaded cherry-picking argument here. Then we come to an option from Joanna Cherry, who's the Scottish National Party's senior member. She's got a very simple proposition again. Just as the first one we talked about, leaving the EU without a deal, was pretty straightforward. Here's another one. Revoke Article 50, which is the formal mechanism by which Britain notifies the European Union that we want to leave. Revoke that in the event of no deal. So rather than leave the EU without a deal, we'd simply say we have to stay in. And that is presented as being an absolute right. Britain can, as it were, just press this button and bada bim, it happens. But it's not quite as simple as that.
No, I mean, the argument is that the European Court has said we can revoke unilaterally. The question is, how would we revoke? So technically, the Prime Minister would have to write to the European Council and say we were revoking the provision. But there's a question, legal debates. I'm not a lawyer, but the lawyers say there's a debate about whether you would need legislation, because, of course, we needed legislation to trigger Article 50 in the first place with the whole Julia Miller case.
So you need legislation to untrigger it?
Yes, and then the alternative view is people say we've had a referendum, so actually, if you want to revoke, it should be subject to a referendum to confirm that and take it back to the people. So it would be politically controversial, of course, and basically the supporters of this amendment are saying if we have not got the meaningful vote through and therefore support for the withdrawal agreement within 2 days of the 12th of April deadline, in effect, rather than making no deal the default process, we flip it and say we pass a motion saying that we would we'd automatically revoke. So
if Parliament couldn't come up with an exit deal that it could support, then the default position is we stay.
Yeah.
We stay. And the other side of the coin is that the EU would have to be convinced that we meant it, that this couldn't just be a negotiating tactic to buy another 6 months to sort ourselves out. This would be, it's for keeps. EU membership is a lot for life, not just for Christmas kind of argument.
Yeah, and the European Court's ruling on that was very clear, that it can't be, if you like, a tactical manoeuvre, as you say, to buy time. It has to be a good faith revocation to remain in the EU.
And then we're getting on to a series now of, as it were, process ideas about how to conduct Brexit. And option M, proposed by Margaret Beckett, the Labour former Foreign Secretary, is again quite straightforward in principle. Any withdrawal agreement must be put to a referendum. So that would mean a second referendum, presumably configured as Remain versus whatever deal the government put before the electorate.
Well, it says it's unless until they have been approved by the people of the UK in a confirmatory vote. So it's an interesting question. If the withdrawal agreement were approved and were to be put in a confirmatory vote, the interesting question is what would the alternative be?
Yeah.
If the government were to say, if the people were to say no to the withdrawal agreement, then what does no mean? So I think it's nicely vague, shall we say, in this motion. But that will be the question on which a lot of the sort of political debate would then revolve. If this were to go through.
And the final one, option O. Now, this comes from Marcus Fish, who's one of the luminaries of the European Research Group, the Ginger Group of Conservative Brexiteers. And this is summarised as Malthouse Plan B. Now, the Malthouse Compromise was something that was being talked about in Westminster a few weeks back, essentially for a technological fix to this very vexed question of how to have a soft border in Northern Ireland while being outside the single market. So a soft border would be needed with the Republic because a hard border is seen as inimical to the peace process. But you need some way of dividing Northern Ireland from the EU single market if you're outside it. And what was envisaged here in Malthouse is Kit Malthouse, who's actually the housing minister, but who's a sort of policy wonk who helped draw this up. The idea is a series of technological fixes so that you could monitor lorry movements without actually having to have an old-fashioned border post with guards saying stop and searching lorries or whatever. And that would be coupled with a standstill agreement. So there would be a period where basically the UK froze its existing relationship with the EU while a future trade deal was worked out. And so that's an interesting, intricate and complicated situation, and a lot of Brexiteers like the sound of it, but it's possibly, again, one of these things that's not entirely straightforward when viewed from the EU side of the fence.
Yeah, I mean, the EU has been very clear that they would not contemplate this. So another sort of way of looking at the aspects of it, other than the Northern Ireland element, is that it's effectively a managed no deal, is sometimes how some of the supporters talk about it. So that for effectively taking the transition period that's in the withdrawal agreement and utilising that, effectively paying into the EU as we would have done if we'd been a member, paying for the 2-year period, having this sort of, as you say, standstill period, in effect, in which you have a series of facilitated agreements on a range of issues to ease our exit. So effectively managing a no-deal scenario in which we haven't got the withdrawal agreement. From the EU's perspective, that's not really very acceptable. What is happening is a series of one-off unilateral arrangements being put in place by both sides in the event of no deal, but they are unilateral, they don't rise to the level of international agreements, and they could be withdrawn. So that would potentially cause problems.
Just a reminder that you're watching BBC Parliament's coverage of the latest round of big Brexit votes in the House of Commons. As you can see from the House of Commons annunciator, the green caption there, the sitting of the House of Commons is now suspended. And that means that the only view we can show you from the Commons chamber is of the clock that's there for members to consult. We can't show any of the wider events. If it was a normal vote going on, we could show you the toings and froings of members as they processed in and out of the chamber and chatted to one another on the way. But at this time, as I say, we are allowed only a very limited view of events. But what we can talk about, Ruth, is what's going on with these votes. What will happen to the information that is going to be generated by tonight's process? Because what seems most unlikely is that there's going to be a gigantic majority for one of the options we've just been talking about, and the bells ring out and a solution is announced and we all live happily ever after and the music comes up. What is more likely to happen is that people start to get an indication of where the centre of gravity in the Commons actually lies and where MPs might begin to sort of identify a solution they can group around, perhaps sort of add a couple of them together.
Yes, and I think you'll see clearly a few of the ideas that have been voted on tonight will drop off And if we have further votes on Monday, then you'll see either, as you say, a consolidation of proposals. You'll see a smaller number, and we'll have to see where the political debate then goes. But I think it's quite important. The House at some point, 12th of April is not far away. The House at some point is going to have to be able to decide what it's going to do in respect of that date. And what we've got tonight is a mix of things that you could argue are, next steps or implicit next steps in relation to what happens.
You do wonder what's going on in the inside the Victorian splendours of the Houses of Parliament. You can see a rather nice live view of Westminster as the votes take place there, with the traffic streaming past. But what's going on inside there? What conversations are they having? Are they seeking to try and forge a compromise even now before we've got the actual results? Quite probably, I guess.
Yes, and they'll be talking about what happens in respect to the 12th of April. There'll be, some of these proposals imply a longer extension because you'd need a longer period of negotiation. So that's going to be contentious and something that there'll be a lot of discussions. Will this be something that the government could go away and negotiate in a matter of days for changes to the future declaration, the political declaration on the future relationship? Or is this something that's going to require, 9-10 month extension to Article 50? Those are the kinds of difficult political discussions that are going to be happening.
And there's the kind of kryptonite element here that if we go beyond a certain point, the UK has to elect a new contingent of members to the European Parliament, and that's something 3 years on, more or less, from the Brexit referendum, that people in the main political parties at least really don't want to have to do because they think it will turn into a kind of de facto second referendum.
Yeah, and you detect no sense of any of the political parties, any of the politicians really wanting to have to face up to fighting those elections.
And part of the reason for that is because this is a proportional representation referendum, and that means that it tends to benefit insurgent political parties. You don't necessarily need a nuts and bolts on the ground organisation to deliver the vote. You're talking about maybe a little more than a third of voters turning out in a poll and perhaps using it as a mechanism to register a protest. So if you are very determined that the UK should leave immediately, there are a number of parties that will offer you that particular option. If there are voters out there who really, really want to stay, there are parties that will offer a remain option, and they don't have to be the big name parties that you're used to seeing in general election ballot papers, and almost anything could happen.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing, though, if we did have to fight these elections this time, is UKIP is not the political force it was several years ago. And of course, one of the big reasons why David Cameron called the referendum was because of the rise of UKIP, their success in a previous European election round, scaring the Conservative Party quite considerably about what inroads they were making into their core vote. UKIP are not the same force that they were.
They've had all sorts of internal splits, and now Nigel Farage is in the new Brexit Party.
So, and one of the questions would be if they're revved up, ready to fight the election, would his new party attracts considerable amounts of support or not from the people who want out?
Well, that's one of the major questions, but it's still quite a big if that we may end up in a position where the UK stays in the EU long enough for that to become a necessity, because that poll is in late May. And there's still plenty of time for things to change before that. And of course, speaking of elections, one of the big items of news today is that Theresa May has announced her intention to quit as Prime Minister if she can get her current Brexit deal through in a new round of the meaningful vote that may take place on Friday. And that changes quite a lot in the Westminster dynamic, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you have had a sense in the last 24 hours, a number of Conservatives coming out and saying that they're prepared to vote for the deal. They don't like the deal. They have the same objections to the deal that they had 3 months ago. But compared to the other options that are being discussed, many of them today, and voted on, they think it's sort of the least worst of a bad range of options now that they recognise that there is no support in the House to go for no deal. So you have the sense that the numbers are moving a bit more in her direction. There's a bit of traction.
But there's a long way to go.
But there's a long way to go. I mean, she needs at least, I think it's 75, something like that. And there is an argument that has been put around that some Conservatives are so worried about the next stage, all very well having the agreement and then opening up a new round of negotiations, very worried about the prospect of her in charge of the negotiations. So part of the sort of price, if you like, for their vote is that she has to make clear that she's going. And certainly at the 1922 committee today, she appears to have indicated, as you say, that she will not be around for the next stage.
Just a reminder, incidentally, that the House of Commons sitting is currently suspended. There are no proceedings going on in the chamber at the moment, which is why you can see the clock there on your screen. MPs are out in the aye and the no lobbies, busily filling out their long, complicated ballot paper and making the choices between all these different Brexit options. And Ruth Fox, you're saying you detect a little bit of a swing in momentum here, that maybe MPs are beginning to shift, but it might not be enough still. I mean, can the deal be brought back a fourth time?
Well, the sticking point is whether the Speaker will allow it to be brought back. He will allow the motion to be laid unless there are any substantial changes. So there's going to be a whole political debate, I think, about that. There is rumours that they might bring it back on Friday.
There's a motion down now for the House of Commons to sit on Friday, which it hadn't intended to do. But that motion, of course, has to be agreed by MPs, and I suppose it's not entirely a done deal that will happen.
No.
We don't quite know at the moment. I suppose it may not be a good look for people to oppose further debate on a matter of such urgency at this point. Yeah. But MPs do actually have to agree that it can't just happen with a snap of the fingers. Yeah. Well,
the irony of bringing back the deal on Friday, the 29th of March, which was supposed to be exit day, is quite something.
Mm-hmm. Incidentally, I'd just like to thank viewers for all their tweets, and please do keep them coming, and we'll try and deal with some of the questions as they come along now. We're trying our best to explain what is, I'm afraid, an extraordinarily complicated process. And just to pick up the point that we were talking about a little bit earlier, this process that they're going through tonight is stage one. It's, if you like, a quarter final. In trying to find a winning Brexit option. And maybe the semi-finals will be on Monday. The House of Commons earlier today voted through a motion that will give them a chance for that to happen on Monday. Once again, a backbench motion to set out what the government, what the Commons should be talking about on Monday will take precedence. So it shoulders aside the stated government business. And so Sir Oliver Letwin and his band of followers will once again be in charge because that motion was agreed. And then MPs could agree to have another discussion not unlike this one, perhaps with a refined set of options.
Yeah, refined set of options, possibly a refined voting system. So there is some argument that once you start to narrow down the options, you could start to use a different voting system. So rather than aye or no, you start to rank your preferences. So that's a possibility that might kick in at a later stage, possibly on Monday, or possibly a third round if we have one.
Isn't there a little bit of a danger here, though, in inventing an almost completely new voting mechanism in the white heat of a sort of national political crisis?
Except in the House, it wouldn't be entirely new. So, I mean, for the election of the Speaker, for select committee chairs, they use the AV electoral system, the alternative vote. So it's not entirely new. And I think if they opted for that, and there's quite a few people who think that that's a good idea. Other people have suggested things like the single transferable vote. Ken Clarke and Helen Goodman in the House, for example, have supported that voting mechanism. I think the problem with that is it's quite a potentially complicated counting mechanism behind STV. AV is rather simpler. So it would not be unknown, and it would be something that's familiar to MPs. And of course, it's a voting system that's used in other parliaments in the UK.
Well, indeed. And I suppose I suppose we should mention at the moment, MPs are currently out voting in the division lobbies, and they will stop and they will return to the chamber at 7:30, and they'll begin debating the statutory instrument, the piece of mini legislation that will postpone Brexit Day. But in the meantime, the counting will have to go on. The clerks of the Commons will be poring over these ballot papers. And I imagine it's quite a complicated exercise, all these little bits of sort of pale green paper that they will have to take very careful notes of. But at the end of it all, we will have a very detailed idea of where MPs are on all these different options. They'll be for A and against B or whatever, and we'll have a very detailed record that will be out there because they have to sign the ballot papers. This isn't like a parliamentary election. You're not voting by secret ballot. This is very, very public ballot, and I think there'll be avid readers and a lot of constituency party associations apart from anything else.
Absolutely. And how long will it be before MPs start tweeting which way they voted on the options, possibly before the result is actually announced?
Yeah, I suppose one of the possibilities here is that MPs might, as you say, publish how they voted. Here's a picture of my ballot as I filled it out. This proves to you that I voted this way. And a lot of electorates, I think, will be very interested as well. I know that I've spoken to MPs in the past who say that I'm caught between a hard Remain constituency and a hard Leave constituency association. One MP once said to me, and if one doesn't get me, the other will.
I think it's actually, if it was, for us, it's at a general election, if we were to tweet our ballot paper, I think that's actually illegal.
Is it? Yeah.
And it's interesting. I don't think the Speaker will like it somehow, but some of them may get away with it.
I suppose the rules were drawn up on this sort of thing so long ago that it probably didn't account for the idea of smartphones and pictures being taken.
Worth adding that proxy voting is still applying in this ballot as well. So the new initiative that new mothers and fathers who are on maternity or paternity leave can still vote via proxy, that has been incorporated into today's system.
Yes, I'm not quite sure. Are there any proxies today? I'm not sure.
Possibly a couple. I think Luciana Berger may still be
away.
Yes,
indeed. Yeah. Yes, she can well still be out of that. But again, when you have this rather interesting snapshot that we're going to get of Commons opinion, that feeds into the idea of compromise building. And then the government will be looking at it too. But will the government be moved? I suppose that's the difficult question, because all this is at the moment an expression of opinion and possibly a political will by the House of Commons, but it's not legally binding. If a majority of MPs came out for one of these particular options and wanted to leave without a deal or to hold a second referendum or whatever it was, ministers could not say, oh, that's jolly interesting, and go on about their business without taking any further notice of it.
They could. I mean, as you say, it's politically important, but it's not legally binding. And I think the government has got a case. It's all very well on one night.
Just to interrupt you for a second, because news reaches me that we actually now do have a picture, just as we were discussing, of a ballot. And this one is from Jonathan Ashworth, the Shadow Health Secretary on the Labour side, saying what he's voted for there. And as you can see, this has come through on Twitter. This is confirmatory public vote. He's in favour of the Margaret Beckett amendment, which we were discussing a little earlier on. So that, I think, is something that Labour have been whipping in favour of. And at the same time, he's voted against the final suggestion, which is contingent preferential arrangements, the Marcus Fish proposal. So there's a whole load of very complicated choices that MPs have to make, and that's just the two that Jonathan Ashworth seems to have made. So, Ruth, there's one example, but there'll be plenty of others and plenty of other different opinions being sounded out from 600 plus MPs.
Indeed. And I still think that the government has got, I think, a legitimate concern that it's all very well MPs voting tonight on one night, or indeed, the next couple of nights when we hold these kinds of votes, if we do. But a government has got to be able to, A, negotiate with the EU. So it's not negotiating with the House of Commons, it's negotiating with the EU to make changes. And it's got to know that any changes it makes are sustainable politically by a majority in the House. And it's got to have a majority not just for changes to the political declaration or whatever, but it's got to be able to have a sustainable majority to get its legislation through. And that requires, as you know, lots and lots of votes over many weeks. So the government, I think, if it's pushed in a direction by these results that it doesn't want to go, or it's worried that the cross-party political alliance that supports one of these options that might emerge.
Another ballot paper has just been tweeted, by the way, Ruth, sorry to interrupt. George Freeman, the Conservative MP, former Life Sciences Minister, former Policy Chair for Theresa May, has tweeted out pictures of the ballot paper he's filled out. I can't quite make out from there what he's ticked and what he's X'd.
Looks like he's joined.
As he was saying in his speech in the chamber earlier, that he was for EFTA and the common market point 2 option and against revocation and against no deal. I think he's taken what may turn out to be quite a sort of solidly mainstream in the Conservative Parliamentary Party, at least, position there. But we'll doubtless see many more ballot papers being tweeted out in the next few minutes as MPs get through the business of completing them. And there's another 5 minutes to run for them to fill things out, 5 or 6 minutes to run for them to fill things out before the House of Commons resumes. So, Ruth, one thing I suppose that might be useful to the government in all this, at least, I mean, we've had the problem now of Theresa May going to Europe, negotiating something, and then coming back and finding she can't get it through the House of Commons, indicating in solid votes how MPs are thinking might be quite helpful for the European Commission in trying to figure out what could get through Westminster, and indicating to them that some particular option isn't a waste of time and it may well have a solid workable majority.
Yeah, and the EU, as I understand it, has always been quite open to the idea of redrafting, rewording the declaration, the political declaration on the future relationship that accompanies the withdrawal agreement. So they don't want to reopen the actual agreement, but they're more than willing to look at the sort of political declaration that sets the sort of terms, in very quite vague terms, about what the next stage of negotiations might be. So if the result of this process is it's clear what kind of relationship we want, so rather than a completely blind Brexit that some people talk about, because of the vague nature of the political declaration, having something more specific that will guide the next stage of the negotiations and that commits the British government to some kind of mandate in that direction, as you say, might well be useful. But it's been, in a sense, our failing in the political way in which we've done this, that we didn't arrive at that situation earlier. The EU's always been, as I understand it, been open to the kinds of approaches that are being discussed.
Well, I'm told MPs will be filing back into the chamber and business will resume in the next 3 or 4 minutes now. But just before that happens, Ruth, time to talk about one other aspect of today's proceedings, because a precedent has been set here in a way that I think alarms a lot of people who are used to the way that the Commons business is normally managed. A big Commons majority controlling the agenda, setting out what MPs debate, setting out the terms of debate. And here we have this new and completely untested idea of MPs themselves seizing control of their own agenda. People might imagine they did that already, but it's been a long time since that has been true. And if we're now in an era of governments with either very small majorities or no majority at all, this is something that could happen rather a lot, and not just to Conservative governments. Imagine if there were a minority Labour government in a few months' time, not an impossible contingency. You could well see this process being applied in reverse, perhaps rather gleefully, from the Conservative side.
Yeah, absolutely. It was things with reform is that when you're in government, you hate the reform and the change. But of course, when you're on the other side in opposition, it's an opportunity. And all of a sudden, you could see, in a couple of years' time, if there were, if the governing arrangements were to change and the Conservative cabinet were on the opposite side of the chamber, you could easily see some Conservative cabinet ministers suddenly thinking this was an excellent idea. But I think it will open up, if we are in this sort of age of minority government for longer periods now, I think it will open up the debate about how business should be managed. So there have been previous commitments to have a business committee for the House so that the House decides how business should be arranged, what should be debated rather than the government.
And I suppose there is the point that if you are a minority government, you can't party like you're Tony Blair in 1997 and pretend you've got an enormous majority and you can absolutely dominate proceedings. Well, the Commons will be reopening for business in just a few minutes' time, so just a couple of points to remind people of. When they get back, they're going to be debating the statutory instrument that formally changes the date of Brexit. In some ways, it's already changed in international law, but all the same, it's a tidying up exercise for MPs to do, and there might be some protest voting against that, and MPs who don't like the idea of forcing a division. And just a reminder too that the Commons clerks who behind the scenes will have been gathering up those ballot papers you've seen tweeted, and all the others as well, of course, will be busily counting the votes, and that might take quite a while. The result might not come till 9. But now let's go back to the House of Commons, where MPs, I think, will soon be reassembling in the chamber. From me, and Mark Darcy, and my colleague Ruth Fox, goodbye.
Order! Order. The voting period has now finished. Lock the doors! Thank you. Order. I must now call the Minister to move motion number 4, exiting the European Union. Minister Robin Walker.
Not moved, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that the draft European Union Withdrawal Act 2018 Exit Day Amendment Regulations 2019, which were laid before this House on the 25th of March, be approved. First, may I express my gratitude to the Joint Committee for Statutory Instruments on their report today. I do, of course, regret the necessity of having to bring forward this instrument and would prefer that we were leaving the EU with a deal at the end of this week. I have voted on 2 occasions for that outcome, but I know that the House has not. The Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster made clear in the debate on the 14th of March that the government would accept the will of the House and seek an extension if that is what Parliament voted for. Parliament then voted by 412 to 202 to approve a motion to seek to extend Article 50. An extension has therefore been agreed with the EU, and the government is now committed to implementing it in domestic law. As the House, I will give way.
Well, my friend, allow me. Well, really? The operative paragraph of the explanatory notes that accompany the SI say the following: that if the House of Commons approves the withdrawal agreement by 11 p.m. on the 29th of March 2019, the so-called relevant time, if it does it by then, right, then if the House does not give such approval by the relevant time, the treaties will instead cease to apply at the earlier date of 11 p.m. on the 12th of April 2019.
Great. Very good.
So, thank you, that's very kind. I'll do my best, Ed. Thanks, mate.
You're doing well.
Great, I'll carry on then.
Is this a speech?
So, the government were meant to lay a commencement order in order to allow us to leave, which they, as I understand, they never laid. I don't think they were ever going to. But does this SI now have the effect that the commencement order would have had? So in other words, if we approve the SI and we have not approved the meaningful vote, would we then leave at 11 p.m. on the 11th of April without the need for a separate commencement order? I think the Minister understands the question.
I do think I understand my honourable friend's question. I think the answer is that a commencement order would have to be laid before the point at which we left, whatever that leaving date was. And so I don't think it is necessarily directly relevant to the debate on this SI, because this SI does not set the date at which we leave the European Union. This SI reflects the date that is agreed in international law. And as the House will be aware, I will come back in a moment, if I can just make a little progress. As the House will be aware, the decision adopted by the European Council, agreed to by the UK, provides for 2 possible durations, as my honourable friend has just pointed out. Should the House approve the negotiated withdrawal agreement this week, the extension would last until the 22nd of May. If the House did not approve the withdrawal agreement, the extension will last until the 12th of April. I said I'd give way to my honourable friend.
What would be the effect if this House rejected the SI tonight? Because we're told constantly that international law always trumps domestic law. So what would be the effect? And in fact, is there any point in either voting for this motion or against this motion? Because it really has no effect at all. International law will always trump what we do, and parliamentary democracy in that sense is inferior to international law. Is that correct?
Minister.
My honourable friend makes an important point, but I think there is a profound effect in rejecting this SI, which I will come to later in my speech, because I think it is important that if we were to reject this SI, it would leave the UK statute book in a mess. I don't think that is therefore a good course of action. I'm happy to give way to the honourable gentleman once.
I thank the Minister for giving way. He said a moment ago if the House were to pass the withdrawal agreement by this week. We've obviously heard Mr Speaker's ruling earlier on, and there are rumours abounding that the government intend to introduce the withdrawal and implementation bill on Friday. Could the Minister confirm whether that is correct, and whether it would have any provisions to alter Section 13 of the EU Withdrawal Act, of course intimately tied up with this SI?
Minister.
It would be a matter for the leader of the House to announce business and not for me. I mean, what I will say, is I heard, and I'm sure the whole government heard, the Speaker's ruling. We take careful note of what the Speaker says, and of course we will act with due respect to that. But I do hope that this House has the opportunity to consider the only withdrawal agreement that has been negotiated and agreed to by the EU. Now, these regulations cater for an extension in either scenario. I will make a bit of progress by redefining exit day to ensure the date and time specified in that definition is 11 p.m. on the 22nd of May or 11 p.m. on the 12th of April, depending on whether the House approves the withdrawal agreement. In either of these two extension scenarios, we will not be required to participate in European parliamentary elections. This is a vitally important instrument with simple but crucial purpose. It will make sure our domestic statute book reflects the extension of Article 50 that was agreed with the EU on Friday the 22nd of March. Good way to my right honourable friend.
Grateful to the Minister. Could you just explain to the House why it was that I think the UK government wanted the 30th of June, but it was scaled back to the 12th of April? Could you just explain why the EU thought it was much better to have a short period, which I, as someone who doesn't want a period at all, obviously find myself on their side rather than the government.
I suspect my honourable friend may well welcome the chance of that shorter period, but I think the answer is that was the decision reached by the Council and agreed by the Council and the UK. Put simply, the instrument doesn't set the date of our departure. Let me finish this point and I will give way. Put simply, the instrument doesn't set the date of our departure, which has already been agreed. It reflects that in domestic law. While the instrument itself is straightforward, its effect will apply across the domestic statute book, so it is important that I set out the details of what it will do, and this comes to my right honourable friend's points. I've explained this to my ministerial counterparts in the Scottish Government and the Welsh Assembly, setting out why the UK Government is taking forward this instrument, but perhaps before I come to that, I can take my honourable friend.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. Can I just refer to the question of my right honourable friend a moment ago, because he didn't ask our honourable friend to restate the position. He asked why the European Council went for the earlier date rather than the 30th of June. Why did it do that?
Well, my understanding is that that was their view of when we would have to give notice that we would be holding European elections if we were staying in for longer, and that is why they set that date as the date by which we would have to have made our mind up as to whether we're leaving. But that is for them to determine. I am not a spokesman for the European Council. Currently, major changes to our major domestic statute book reflecting our exit from the European Union are due to take effect on exit day, which is defined in the EU Withdrawal Act 2018 as 11 p.m. on 29th of March, despite the extension terms that have been agreed at international level. These changes apply across a huge number of policy areas, from emissions trading to Europol, and all of these changes are designed to ensure that our statute book works when we leave the European Union. All of these changes are due to take place on exit day, and this definition has effect across the whole UK statute book. Now that an extension to Article 50 has been agreed in EU and international law, we need to amend this date to reflect the new point at which the EU treaties cease to apply. Give way to the Honourable Lady.
I thank the Minister for giving way. And has he learned any lessons about putting exact times and dates on the statute book in primary legislation, just so that his Prime Minister can blackmail her own party?
Minister.
I think the Honourable Lady makes a political point which is not particularly appropriate for a debate on technical legislation. But this instrument has been laid under the EU Withdrawal Act to do just what I said. Section 20, subsection 4 of the Act contains a power to amend exit day through a statutory instrument. Give way to my honourable friend.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. He mentioned that the European Council had agreed an extension. There was, of course, a resolution of this House to seek to agree an extension, which I would suggest amounts to an authority to negotiate. Has he been advised that amounted also to an authority to conclude an extension, and did he get legal advice on that point?
Well, Minister. My right honourable friend, who I know is a keen legal eagle as well as an experienced minister in this department, but of course the government is confident of its legal position in the decisions that it has taken. The power was specifically included in the EU Withdrawal Act because parliamentarians envisaged a situation in which extension could be required. As the then Parliamentary Under-Secretary said in the debate, this government has had discussions with backbenchers and we are grateful that they tabled their amendments. They provide the government with the technical ability to amend the date, but only if the UK and the EU unanimously decide to change the date that the treaties cease to apply, as set out in Article 50. Give way to my...
I'd like to ask the Minister, with respect to the meeting this afternoon of the Joint Committee on Statutory Instruments, could he report to the House what the outcome of that was and whether in fact they consider the question of varies as is within their standing orders? Could you please give me an answer to that?
Minister. I didn't catch the whole of my right honourable and learned friend's question, but I am confident that the Joint Committee of Statutory Instruments has had a chance to look at this, and as I said, I welcomed at the beginning of my remarks their report. I want to be clear with the House that the power in the EU Withdrawal Act can only be used to redefine exit day to the new day and times that the treaties will cease to apply in the UK. To specify any other day would not be a legal use of that power. It is absolutely, in one moment I will, it is absolutely critical that the House approves this instrument for the simple reason that the extension of Article 50 has been agreed and is therefore legally binding in international law. I understand that there have been some members who are of the view that we are still set to leave the EU on the 29th of March, but that is not legally the case. Owing to the agreement between the UK and the EU to extend Article 50, the UK will remain a member state of the EU until at least 11 p.m. on the 12th of April as a matter of international law. If this instrument were not to pass, therefore, it wouldn't change that fact, but it would lead to confusion across our statute book from the 29th of March. I give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On that very point, I've got this wonderful machine that says we're now 2 days, 4 hours, 17 minutes and 12 seconds away. I actually believe from coming out of the EU. This is a pretty good machine, actually. The truth of the matter, Minister, is it not that if we reject this SI tonight, and I hope we do by a big margin, we will have come out in domestic law and we'll be in breach of an international treaty for about 2 weeks. Isn't that the truth? And that's why you need to get this SI through.
Minister! I simply do not share my honourable friend's understanding or view of the matter. I respect his point of view, but I'm afraid I think in terms of the legal facts he is not right. A large volume of EU exit legislation preparing the statute book for the moment EU law ceases to apply is due to enter into force automatically on exit day. Without this instrument being in place, there would be a clash in our domestic law whereby contradictory provisions would apply, both EU rules and the new UK rules simultaneously, and in some cases, new UK rules would replace EU rules prematurely. We estimate that tens of thousands of amendments to our domestic legislation will be made in the light of EU exit. These include changes which relate to the sharing of information, reporting requirements placed on businesses and public institutions, and the role of the European Commission in issuing licences and certificates. For example, let us take the amendments relating to the rights of lawyers to practice in the UK. If these regulations come into force on 29th of March, EU lawyers who are not registered European lawyers immediately before exit day are at risk of committing a criminal offence if they continue to provide particular legal services in the UK. Other examples include UK operators being unable to comply with EU emissions trading scheme and having to surrender their emissions allowances early, and the risk that firms stop trading to avoid legal breaches given their uncertainty about when new customs, excise and VAT regimes would kick in. There are examples from across the statute book, but what is clear is that without this instrument, there would be significant confusion and uncertainty for businesses and individuals on the 29th of March. As I have said, happy to give way to my honourable friend.
I'm very grateful. He is making the strongest possible case that the importance of this statutory instrument is to make sure that our reputation across the world for being a country that is reliable to deal with and whose obligations in international law are the same as our domestic legislation remain intact.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. He and I have always agreed we need to do this process properly, and that is what this SI is all about. Happy to give way to the honourable lady.
Thank you. Very grateful indeed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful indeed to the Minister. Isn't the reality of the situation such that while we affectionately refer to the withdrawal deal as the Prime Minister's Brexit deal, as the Prime Minister's deal. The reality is, it has been signed by 27 other EU member states. It is signed, it is not going to be unsigned. The deal is done. There is only one deal, and that is the Prime Minister's deal. An extension that we need tonight is simply to give us a very short extension, but we absolutely have to get behind this Brexit deal, get it through, get the implementation period, and move on. It's not going to be reopened by the other 27.
As I often find, I wholeheartedly agree with the Honourable Lady. It isn't the sole point of this SI, of course, because this SI allows for two specific scenarios. Happy to give way.
Grateful. Can my honourable friend explain why his junior minister and the member for Spelthorne told this House on Friday at column 1377 that the Article 50 period will only be extended if the House votes for a statutory instrument to give effect to such an extension? And he confirmed that the government would have to lay a statutory instrument and the House would have to debate and vote on it. It now seems as though that was totally inaccurate.
Well, I didn't see what my honourable friend said in that debate, but I am very grateful to the honourable gentleman for promoting me so that I have junior ministers underneath me. The question before us today is not a matter of whether the extension of Article 50 happens. The issue before us today is a separate question. Does the domestic statute book reflect this extension, without which there could be a confusing and unclear statute book with clashing provisions? If we are to resolve that clash, it is essential that the instrument being debated today is made before the 11 p.m. on the 29th of March, so that it can come into force ahead of that time. This will align exit day in UK law, I will in one moment, with the new day and time on which the EU treaties cease to apply to the United Kingdom in both EU and international law. Very happy to give way to my right honourable friend.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. Can I just put it to him that it is exactly the way that this executive decision was approved by a minister without proper reference to Parliament, bringing back to this House not just international law, but law that is binding in our own law and binding on this Parliament. This is exactly this kind of decision-making and law-making that people voted against in the referendum.
Absolutely. I'd say to my right honourable friend, I think he makes an important point, actually, and I think it's a point on which many of us could agree that this process reflects some of the issues that caused people to vote the way that they did. But I would also say to him that this House did vote for an extension, and it was in respecting the vote of this House that the government sought to negotiate one. But I am acutely aware of the huge amount of work undertaken by members across this House to scrutinise...
point of order, Sir Christopher Chope.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister made light of my intervention, in which I drew express attention of the House to what had been told to this House on Friday during the course of an urgent question by a Minister of the Crown from my honourable friend's department. If what was said then is wrong, then when are we going to get an official correction and apology from the government? Because certainly those of us who were in the House on Friday were gravely misled by what was said.
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for his point of order. Obviously, I well remember the exchanges, and I'm aware of the particular interaction to which the honourable gentleman is referring. The normal principle applies. Every member is responsible for the veracity of what he or she says in this chamber. If a member inadvertently errs, it is incumbent upon that member to correct the record. The Minister perfectly reasonably said that he hadn't seen what was said, but I mean, it's not beyond the wit and sagacity of the honourable member for Christchurch to arrange for a copy of the extract from the official report to wing its way to the dispatch box during the course of this consideration, and the Minister might then be in a particular further to respond to the honourable gentleman. Minister. Do beg the Minister's pardon. Point of order, Angela Eagle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could you advise me whether what members opposite are actually objecting to is the use of the royal prerogative and the logic which allows us to sign up to international treaties using that power? And the logic of what they're actually arguing is that we should get rid of the Queen.
I simply say to the right honourable lady, it's not for me to offer an exegesis. It's not for me to offer an exegesis of what individuals might think about our constitutional arrangements, including the use or otherwise of the royal prerogative. But the Right Honourable Lady has made her own force in her own way, with some panache, and it will be studied on the record. Oh, very well. Point of order, Mr. Mark Francois.
Very quickly, Mr. Speaker, there are some people in this House who do want to get rid of Her Majesty, but they're not on this side, they're on theirs.
Yes, can we... I'm extraordinarily grateful, I'm sure, to the Right Honourable Gentleman, but I wonder if we now might return to the relatively narrow ambit of the statutory instrument. Minister Robin Walker.
Speaker, I shall be brief. I am acutely aware of the huge amount of work undertaken by members across this House to scrutinise the near 550 statutory instruments brought forward to prepare for exit and provide legal certainty. If this instrument were not to pass, that work would be undermined by the legal uncertainty created. If, on the other hand, we pass today's instrument, then the only thing that would change across all of those SIs is the moment at which they come into force, aligning with the time of our exit so that they work properly. I remain hopeful that this House will support the Prime Minister's deal and that we will leave the EU on the 22nd of May with a short technical extension to ensure we can pass the necessary implementing legislation. This instrument is, however, without prejudice to whether that is the case. I hope this House can therefore agree on the necessity of this instrument and approve it so that it can come into force and avoid serious confusion and uncertainty for businesses and individuals. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move.
Order. The question is motion number 4 as on the order paper. Mr. Matthew Pennycook.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on behalf of the opposition to support the motion. As the Minister has made clear, the statutory instrument before us is a necessary one and it should be entirely uncontroversial. As the House knows, in response to the Prime Minister's letter of the 20th of March to the President of the European Council, the Council agreed to an extension of the Article 50 process until the 22nd of May, provided the withdrawal agreement is approved by the House this week. The Council further agreed that if the withdrawal agreement is not approved this week, an extension until the 12th of April would take place to allow for the UK to, and I quote, indicate a way forward for their consideration, something that we hope the preceding debate and votes will contribute to. On the 22nd of March, the UK's permanent representative to the EU, Sir Tim Barrow, wrote to the President of the Council to confirm agreement of the proposed extension arrangement under Article 50, subsection 3 of the Treaty on European Union. As such, Mr. Speaker, the extension of the Article 50 process till at least 12th of April will now happen as a matter of international law, and as the Minister said, it is legally binding in international law. This statutory instrument merely aligns exit day as it is defined for the purposes of the EU Withdrawal Act to the new dates that have been agreed. And it is entirely correct that it comes after agreement on extension was reached between the two parties. Indeed, the EU Withdrawal Act itself makes clear that this sequencing, that is to say that any new agreement between the parties as to when the treaties cease to apply to the UK, must precede any change to exit day for the purposes of the Act. And that is what is precisely required by the legislation. That is because Section 20, subsection 4 of the Act, provides that a Minister of the Crown may, by regulations, amend the definition of exit day to, and I quote, ensure that the day and time specified in the definition are the day and time that the treaties are to cease to apply to the United Kingdom. The operative word, Mr. Speaker, being are, not the day and time the government would be hoping the EU Council would agree to. As such, logically, the Act makes clear that the government could not propose a statutory instrument that would stipulate a date or dates for exit day different to the date on which, as was agreed at the time, the treaties would cease to apply. In short, the power to redefine exit day as set out in the 2018 Act passed by this House only last year only arises if the date has already been changed. Those who... Happy to give way.
Thank you, Mr. Does the Shadow Minister agree with me that it refers to a date? Therefore, wouldn't it be more logical for this statutory instrument to have the 12th of April down, and if that date needs to be changed, it should be changed subsequently? I don't understand how we can have two dates in a statutory instrument.
I thank the honourable gentleman for raising that point, and he's raised it before in recent days. I think you can do it either way is the short answer. There's the difference of legal opinion as to which creates the least amount of confusion and potential for legal challenge. But the government has decided to do it this way, and we support the SI as a means to do so. In short, Mr. Speaker, I want to get back to the fact that those who take issue with the sequencing, or the mere fact that this statutory instrument is before us at all today, do so because they are opposed in principle to an extension to the Brexit process beyond Friday the 29th of March, either because presumably they're relaxed about leaving with a deal or positively wish for such an outcome. Happy to give way.
I'm grateful for the opposition's support. Isn't the bottom line that we are extending Article 50 via this SI tonight to avoid the damaging no-deal exit that my constituents in Winchester, and I'm sure his constituents, do not want to see? And this House has expressly said on several occasions now, and I predict will again this evening, it does not want to see.
Thank the honourable gentleman for that intervention. I agree with him to the extent that we have to do everything possible to avoid a disastrous no-deal exit. This SI does not do that. The extension agreed by the Council in the UK does that. This SI ensures that our domestic legislation aligns with what's already been agreed and doesn't create legal confusion. It's certainly the case, Mr. Speaker, that no one, including those who have no problem with an extension, expected that this government would fail so miserably that an extension of any kind would be required. But it was always a possibility, Mr. Speaker. That is precisely why the EU withdrawal bill, at least in its original form, was drafted to provide for circumstances in which a withdrawal agreement came into force later than the 29th of March following an extension. As the government itself put it at the time in its delegated powers memorandum, and I quote, "Exit day will be dependent on the withdrawal negotiations with the EU." As my right honourable friend, the member for Wallasey, has already commented upon, it was the government's decision to play politics with the issue of exit day for the purposes of our domestic legislation, constraining the flexibility provided for in the original drafting of the bill by putting a fixed date and exit time on the face of it in a vain attempt to curry favour with the hardliners on their own benches. That means we require a statutory instrument in the form that is before us. That said, it remains the case that it is simply not reasonable to question the legitimacy of the government's actions in agreeing to an extension to the Article 50 process, or the fact that this regulation has sequentially followed that agreement.
I want to correct him on his account of recent history. In fact, the government agreed to put the date in voluntarily and then were blackmailed by the Remain faction in our party to put flexibility into the date. That's actually what happened.
I think he'd agree with me. The original draft of the bill did not include it. The reasons that the government put it in and the actions of the right honourable gentleman, the member for West Dorset, and again helpfully coming to the rescue, I leave to him and his view of what happened at the time. It follows, Mr. Speaker, that if this House voted against this statutory instrument, it cannot prevent an extension of the Article 50 process taking place until at least one of the two proposed dates. In short, Mr. Speaker, and much to my delight, there is nothing that honourable and right honourable members opposite can do today to force the UK out of the EU in 2 days' time. All that would be achieved by voting against this regulation would be immense legal confusion, with two parallel sets of regulations in place, those deriving specifically and directly from EU law and those made under the 2018 Act, which would diverge from it. As the Minister opposite put it, our statute book would be in a complete mess. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, this statutory instrument should self-evidently be supported, and why we will be doing so on this side of the House when we divide on it.
Thank you. Sir William Cash.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The first point I'd like to raise is regarding the ministerial code and the actions of the Prime Minister. It is quite clear under the ministerial code, and I'm glad to see the Attorney General is sitting here on the front bench, that the law officers must be consulted in good time before the government is committed to critical decisions involving legal considerations. Now, even if I was prepared to concede, which I'm not, that it follows that the law officers don't necessarily have to divulge their opinions, though actually he's been obliged to do so by a resolution of the House on the 4th of December in the past. The question is, as a matter of fact, which the Prime Minister today and 2 days ago has resolutely refused to answer me, did the Prime Minister consult the law officers as a matter of fact? I asked her and she refused twice. The inference is that she did not. Is this not misleading the House? That is a question which worries me intensely. Mr. Speaker, having dealt with that issue, which I regard as very serious, I also have to say that I take the strongest possible objection, as do many other distinguished lawyers, QCs and former judges, to the action that has been taken by the government in purporting to enter into a binding agreement in international law which purportedly alters the UK's exit date from the European Union in advance of the votes by each House on the draft regulations, which would create an alteration to exit day in the European Union Withdrawal Act 2018. It has been suggested, Mr. Speaker, that the Act requires that the draft regulations can only be submitted to each House for an affirmative resolution once the date of exit has been altered at international level. This is simply not correct. The provision for approval by affirmative resolution is a freestanding provision in Schedule 7, paragraph 14, under which a draft instrument is to be submitted to the House. It was incumbent on the government, Mr. Speaker, to respect the normal practice of allowing Parliament to approve any legislative changes before entering into a binding international obligation. Mr. Speaker, I was the Shadow Attorney General during the Iraq debacle, and I have to say, Mr. Speaker, that on that occasion it became apparent that there should have been consultation with Parliament on a matter of the gravest national importance. And the reality is, if I may say, obliged or created the circumstances in which the then Attorney General submitted his opinion to the House. We had a similar situation with regard to the issue of the bombing of Syria more recently. So the idea that Parliament is not required to approve any legislative changes before entering into a binding international obligation is well established recently in precedent. The course taken seeks to present Parliament with a fait accompli, in which Parliament is pressured to approve the draft regulations because failure to do so would cause disconformity, it is alleged by the Minister just now, between the UK's international obligations and domestic law. Under our constitutional law, Mr. Speaker, the power of the United Kingdom government to conclude binding agreements with states and other international actors, such as the European Union, exists under the royal prerogative. It is a basic principle of our constitutional law that the royal prerogative may only be exercised consistently with the intention of Parliament. Any purported exercise of that power, of the royal prerogative, that is inconsistent with the intention of Parliament, is unlawful and of no effect in our internal legal order. I am troubled, and this is why I asked in an intervention, as to what the outcome was of the Joint Committee on Statutory Instruments today, and I made the reference to the question of whether or not there was proper consideration of the question of whether or not it was intra vires or ultra vires. I do not know the answer to that question, but it's because I haven't been given the information. And I asked the Minister to check whether that was the case. Did they consider the question of vires in relation to the issues before that committee today? Now, the intention of Parliament, Mr. Speaker, is to be found solely in Acts of Parliament. It is not shown by resolutions of the House of Commons, unless an Act of Parliament itself says otherwise, such resolutions in practice do not have effect. Under the principles of public international law, a state is entitled to invoke the fact that its apparent consent to be bound by an international agreement has been expressed in violation of a provision of its internal law, if the violation is manifest, defined as it happens in the words, quotes, objectively evident. and concerns a rule of internal law of fundamental importance, and I refer here to Article 46 of the Vienna Convention. These criteria are clearly satisfied, so that on the face of it there is a manifest violation of our internal constitutional law. It is completely and totally unlawful, and it is absolutely abominable that we should be faced with having to vote on the specious grounds of a so-called uniformity, which the Minister has put forward. I don't blame him personally, because quite frankly, I forgive him. I ask him to forgive me for suggesting that he's taking advice from other persons who are purporting to be learned in the law. But I'm afraid they are entirely wrong. That is the point. And Lord Panic himself, only yesterday, raised these very questions himself. And Lord Panic, of course, is a most distinguished lawyer. In fact, he was the lawyer for the plaintiff, Gina Miller, in the case which required the Act of Parliament, the Notification of Withdrawal Act. Lord Panic knows what he's doing. In fact, I go so far as to say I actually instructed him with others in relation to the Rees-Mogg case back in 1993. So I know a little bit about the brilliance of Lord Panic. Lord Panic says the legal concerns which some lawyers have expressed is that the power to specify the day and time when the treaties have ceased to apply is not satisfied by identifying two possibilities. It is not possible, if this SI is enacted, to identify exit day simply by reading it. He draws attention to this point. But I think it is worth considering the fact that Lord Panic is not to be taken for granted, and indeed, for that matter, the Lord Panic has raised serious doubts about this matter, Mr. Speaker. I'll certainly give way.
But I think the House will be relieved to know that it is to be spared a dilation on the matter of Lord Panic's involvement in the Rees-Mogg case, of which sparing I think I can comfortably be reassured by the honourable gentleman. Very good.
Completely, because I don't need to dilate on that question whatsoever. I am simply making the point as a point of reference. Now, Mr. Speaker, with respect to the draft regulations, they contain unlawful sub-delegation. The draft of course, I give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. If what he says turns out, in fact, to be the case, what is the consequence if the government did make this decision and it turns out to be the decision was taken unlawfully or out with the scope of this place?
They're not the regulations are not binding and they're invalid in law. It's as simple as that. The draft regulation, and it's a serious matter, because this is, let us get back to the question from the point of view of the people listening to this debate outside Parliament. This is not just a question, Mr. Speaker, about a question of process. It is about the fact that as we speak, as I speak at this moment in time, under the provisions of the Withdrawal Act, we are intending to repeal the European Community Act 1972 on exit day, which is the 29th of March. That is the law of the land, subject only to this rather esoteric question about the commencement order, which can be resolved in 30 seconds by a minister coming to the table and saying, I now say that this commencement order is now in force. It's as simple as that. It doesn't require anything more than that. So we are talking about something which goes to the heart of the referendum decision itself, the democratic decision of the British people, which was that they wanted to leave the European Union and that was to be on the 20th. And by the way, just one moment, if I may. The House of Commons voted by 499 to around 120 for the Notification of Withdrawal Act. Yeah. The House of Commons voted for the Referendum Act and gave to the British people, contrary to the rubbish that I hear all over certain parts of the House, that somehow or other Remainers in Parliament have a right to be able to take back that decision from the people. It was given to them and they decided by 17.4 million that that was their decision. This Parliament has no right to take that decision back from them. Yes.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, the member for Stone, for giving way, and I never knew that we were going to have such a treat this evening, and so it's a great pleasure, Mr. Speaker, to have the opportunity to ask my honourable friend a question. It so happens that I've got a copy of the European Union Withdrawal Act with me, and it does say in Schedule 7, paragraph 14. Actually, Mr. Speaker, it was completely by chance, because I had no idea that my honourable friend was going to dilate on this matter. But then I heard the member for Brent North saying, first of all, the word deviation, as if this was some sort of BBC panel show, and second, I heard him from a sedentary position saying, I have no idea what my honourable friend from the member for Stone is talking about. It turns out that Schedule 7, paragraph 14 says, very clearly, a statutory instrument containing regulations under Section 24, which, for the benefit of the member for Brent North, is the section of this Act by which exit day is changed, so it's hardly a deviation, may not be made, unless a draft of the instrument has been laid before and approved by a resolution of each House of Parliament. So it occurs to me, Mr. Speaker, and I invite my honourable friend to agree with me, that he's doing an enormous service to this House.
I'm extremely indebted to my very good and very close friend, and I simply say this, that I'm so glad that he's made that point, because I am simply trying to do what I've always tried to do, which is to get past all the fog and ask the central question, which bears on the issue of the sovereignty of this House in relation to that referendum act which gave the right to the British people, and the 2008 Act to which he refers is the moment in time when we made that decision in this House, and even the member for Rushcliffe voted for the third reading of that Act. So this was a decision that was taken by this Parliament. So forget the fact that these indicative votes which are going on at the moment, which I regard as a parliamentary bag of licorice all sorts, is going through a process at the moment of some kind of obfuscation of the fundamental issues, because the draft regulations published yesterday, or a few days ago, are not in accordance with the 2001-8 Act, since they do not change exit day to a particular date. Instead, they purport to change exit day to 2 different dates, which is the point Lord Pannick referred to, depending on whether the House does or does not pass a resolution which satisfies the European Council decision. The words does not satisfy the European Council decision, Mr. Speaker. I have raised this repeatedly. We have been supplicating the EU. We have given in to the EU. My European Scrutiny Committee last March made a very good report, and we pointed out that we should not accept the terms of reference that had been dictated to us by the European Union. That's where it all went wrong. And it then went wrong when the Withdrawal Act was overtaken by the Chequers Agreement on a pre-planned operation inside Number 10, driven by the Prime Minister and her advisers, the effect of which was to undermine the repeal of the 1972 Act. And I say pre-planned because actually we passed the Act on the 26th of June by royal assent, and within 10 days the Chequers proposals had come forward which morphed into the withdrawal agreement and Article 4, the effect of which is to make us subjugated to the rule-making of the European Union. That is what went on, and it was done deliberately, and it was going on while we were actually passing the Withdrawal Act itself. It was a monstrous, I would describe it as a deceit on the British people. And I would go further and say that in respect of the course taken by the government of seeking to preempt the affirmative resolution, this has definitely contaminated the lawfulness of its actions and has at a minimum created serious doubts about the legal situation. And I would draw attention, for those who would be interested, in the views of the retired Lord Justice of Appeal, Sir Richard Akins, who is entirely clear on this question. So I simply say, I wrote a letter to the Prime Minister yesterday. I have not yet had a reply. She has not, in fact, answered my question about the Ministerial Code, which I've asked for twice. And as far as I am concerned, Mr. Speaker, this statutory instrument should be voted down, and I invite the Attorney General to explain whether as a matter of fact, irrespective of whether he's prepared to disclose his advice, which I think he should publish, whether or not, in fact, the Prime Minister did consult him as required under the Ministerial Code.
Indeed. The honourable gentleman has concluded his oration. Thank you. Thank you. Tommy Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So it seems we are not to leave the European Union on the 29th of March after all. Let me begin by offering my commiserations to the honourable member from Rayleigh and Wickford and his associates in the European Research Group. I appreciate this must be a difficult time. I fear that commemorative memorabilia may need to be scrapped, the champagne orders may need to be cancelled. Indeed, the bunting will have to be put back in the attic as Freedom Day celebrations are cancelled throughout the land. But it seems to me, Mr. Speaker, that the inconvenience and disappointment of the hard right faction in this Parliament is a small price to pay in order to see if we can save the country from catastrophe. Now, Mr. Speaker, the gravity of this situation means that it is not a moment for schadenfreude, so I shall refrain from seeking any pleasure in the disappointment of others. But I do think that we need to point out in this debate that the fact that we are discussing this statutory instrument here tonight can only be seen as nothing other than the abject humiliation of the British government in this process. Not only because, on more than 100 occasions, they have foolishly come to that dispatch box and reassured us that we would be leaving the European Union on the 29th of March, but also because, that having proven impossible, they now come and offer us a timetable that is not of their design, but one that is imposed upon them. If that isn't humiliation, I don't know what is. But, Mr. Speaker, as so many have said in recent debates on this matter, they have only themselves to blame. The fact that this is here before us tonight seeking an extension to the process is entirely a consequence of the way in which the process has been conducted by this government. From the word go, they were not interested in anyone's opinion but their own. The dialogue about how to implement the 2016 referendum result was constrained only to the voices within the minority Conservative government and their allies in the DUP, who I see are absent from our proceedings tonight. And that, Mr. Speaker, is shocking. It is shocking because what they should have done was to try and reach some sort of national consensus on how to proceed in this most divided of countries. But that is what they did, and of course in the middle of it they called a general election, and the Prime Minister asked the British people for a mandate to support the manner in which she was discharging the referendum result. And the British people refused to give it to her. Now, you would have thought that at that point, that would be the time to change tack, take stock and perhaps readjust. But no, they simply circled the wagons closer, bunkered down, and spent the last 2 years negotiating with the European Union without reference to or a mandate from this Parliament. That is why we are in the situation that we are today. Now, I think what happens next, Mr. Speaker, is the real question. If we have the delay granted that the statutory instrument suggests, what are we going to do with the time that is afforded to us? And to my mind, that entirely depends on whether the government wishes to go forward with this Parliament in good faith or in bad faith. A bad faith way of going forward would be to regard the debates that we have had today and that we may well have in the future, to regard them as some sort of inconvenient sideshow, an irritation to be dispensed with before they come back yet again with a failed agreement, unaltered, to put before this House. That would be bad faith, and I think we saw some of it earlier on today when the government actually tried to prevent us having the debates that we had this afternoon in the first place. And it wasn't a good look, Mr. Speaker. And actually, it is interesting that the Parliament rejected the government's position today by an even bigger majority than we did on Monday. And I would caution the government to have some humility now in the way in which it proceeds. A good faith way of proceeding would be to try and reach out and agree a new political consensus with other voices in this Parliament and in this country, in particular other political parties and the devolved administrations within the United Kingdom. That would be good faith. Now, it's a little surreal, Mr. Speaker, because we are discussing what to do with the timetable before we actually know the outcome of the votes that we have had earlier on. So I don't know yet what the mood of the Parliament is and the various options put before it. But I am concerned that when the government has talked about how it will respond to those decisions and those debates, it has suggested that it couldn't possibly contemplate supporting anything which it regarded as undeliverable. Now, I think we can all accept, Mr. Speaker, that everything has practical consequences, and we have to come up with proposals that are practical and that can be implemented. But I rather fear that the use of the word undeliverable in this context is simply meant to mean anything which conflicts with the draft withdrawal agreement they have with the European Union. And if that is the case, then that is another conceit to try and deny the will of this Parliament, because the whole purpose of this exercise is that, having voted down the draft withdrawal agreement by such large majorities, we are genuinely engaged in a process to see if there is a route to a majority by some other means. And it stands... I will happily give way.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. Does the honourable member agree with me that the one thing that is genuinely undeliverable would be a no-deal Brexit, because we do not have the mechanisms, the trading mechanisms that would make it possible to deliver a no-deal Brexit and retain the stability of the country?
Well, I think that is self-evidently true. But what is deliverable is to go back to the European Union, remove the red lines, and say we seek a new set of discussions with a new objective in mind. And my belief is that the European Union would respond warmly to any such approach in that nature. But I have to say that to those who are concerned now that we are caught into a process where the European Union itself is placing constraints on what we can or cannot do, our salvation is in our own hands, because all we need to do is to revoke the notice that we served under Article 50 of the Act, pause the situation, and then we can take control of the process ourselves, without constraint or qualification or conditions being set by the European Union or anyone else. And it would seem to me that that is a sensible move that the government ought to consider. It was, of course, an unpardonable folly to serve Article 50 in the first place without having the first clue about the direction that it was going to lead to, which is why I and my colleagues at the time voted against it. Now, Mr. Speaker, doing that will take time, and unfortunately what we have before us tonight can only be regarded as an interim measure, because it doesn't get rid of the cliff edge, it just pushes it a few weeks into the future. I'm sure that we will have to come back to debate further statutory instruments and indeed further legislation which will allow us properly to change direction and negotiate better to form a better agreement with the European Union. But that will take time, Mr. Speaker, and it is not going to be done by the 22nd of May, which is why we might as well get used to the situation now and become acclimatised to it, that in order to get a better outcome, we need a long and significant delay in order to achieve that. And that, of course, means that we do need to prepare and get ready to fight European elections on the 23rd of May 2019. And I have to say, Mr. Speaker, I'm becoming alarmed at the fact that, and it seems to be the people who wish to deny the people of the United Kingdom any say on how negotiations have turned out, they are also seemingly terrified of the prospect of facing the electorate on the 23rd of May and asking them who they want to represent them in the European Union. I don't even understand how the government negotiated an agreement which provided us, for this country, to be not represented at all in the power structures of the European Union while a transitional period of up to 2 years was taking place. That is ridiculous. We may stay, we may leave the European Union, but for as long as we are there, people in the United Kingdom have an equal right to be represented in those structures, as do people in any of the other 27 member states. So I say we should acclimatise ourselves now to the idea of fighting these elections, and I say also it would be a good thing. I know it will be an embarrassment for some people who thought we'd get it all done and dusted by now, but it's proving to take a little longer than people thought. And that means that as we are taking whatever time is required, we should be represented. And I would predict two things if we would have had these elections on the 23rd of May. The first is that the turnout would be considerably greater than the 35% who voted in 2014. And the second would be, and I will hope to be judged in this, that the main losers in those elections will be the UK Independence Party, who flunked the result last time. Now, whether or not people respond to those elections will depend how this Parliament approaches them. If we are seen to be dragged kicking and screaming to those ballot boxes, it will not be a good look. But if we embrace the opportunity for people in this country to have their democratic say, we may, in fact, be able to change the narrative completely on how this matter is being addressed. We may be able to get rid of much of the ill-tempered debate that has taken place and begin the process of political healing in this country. So, Mr. Speaker, that's why we will not offer any objection to this statutory instrument here tonight, but I say it is only one small step along a much longer road that we now need to take.
Sir John Redwood.
Mr. Speaker, the mood outside this House is overwhelming that we should get on with it. And the nation heard the Prime Minister and Government promise on countless occasions that we would be leaving on the 29th of March 2019 with or without a deal. It's quite true, the Prime Minister always said she really wanted a deal and she expected to get a deal, but she never ruled out leaving without a deal, and she was right not to do so. Indeed, for many months, she used to say, no deal is better than a bad deal, and left open the possibility that what was on offer was so bad that it would be better just to leave. Now, I'm not someone who thinks we just leave. I think we leave with a series of deals, and I'm very pleased that the government has put in place the essential deals we need in order to leave. Of course, we needed an aviation deal and a haulage deal and a government procurement deal and all the rest of it. And those things have been sorted out, I'm told, over the long 2 years, 8 months that have elapsed since the original vote. And I'm very pleased that the government, in parallel, with constantly telling us it was going to get an agreement that we would like, carried on with so-called no-deal planning, which, as I've said, is many-deal planning. It's having a series of lesser deals to make sure that things work smoothly so that we were in a good position, so that we had options. I wish to develop my argument a little. So the government put us in that position, and I think what we haven't heard from the Minister, but more importantly from the Prime Minister who is responsible for this, what the case is for this delay that we are now being asked to approve in United Kingdom legislation. Because it seems to be mainly geared to the idea that this House will accept the withdrawal agreement after we should have left rather than before we were going to leave. But we now learn that the actual deal offered was not allowing the government up until May or early June to put the thing through. The EU was very tough on the government and said you actually have to get the withdrawal agreement through before the official leaving date of the 29th of March under the previous understanding, leaving the government now only a couple of days to do that. And the question must be to the government, why has it taken so long to get this agreement into a shape which the House would pass? And why have they been so dilatory about presenting or representing this agreement, or even better, why didn't they renegotiate it to get it into a form where it might be worth considering again? Because there is, as the Speaker has rightly posed to the government, the issue of is there any point in constantly bringing the same thing back time and time again when the answer is negative? And the government has not really set out today, in the context of wishing a delay, why suddenly it would be different now that they've left it for so long, and why did they leave it so long? if it was so time critical. They've had plenty of months from the original Chequers disaster when they first adumbrated this policy and had mass resignations from the government and the Conservative Party, through to today, when many more resignations later, there is still a considerable reluctance by sections of the governing party to vote for the withdrawal agreement. So I fear I'm not free to support this proposal this evening, because I think there hasn't been a good case for delay, and I don't think they've made the case with the public as to why we have to be let down when there was such a very clear promise embedded into the law, into the Withdrawal Act, which this Parliament passed. And I would recommend to the government that they think again about how they wish to use the time they are trying to buy. I also have a lot of sympathy with my honourable friend from Stone over the crowning irony of the position the government has placed us in, where they are claiming superior European law to do something that the Leave majority in this country does not want them to do, but they're not so sure of their legal ground that they want this House to actually endorse it, because they know otherwise there might be legal difficulties. But to do it on the very piece of legislation which is taking back control is just almost unbelievable. This House has rightly decided to back the vote of the British people and by a solemn statute say we are taking back control, and from the day that that comes into effect, all laws and matters relating to government and public business will be settled in this House of Commons and not by the EU. And we're now told that the Prime Minister can have a conversation in an evening meeting around a council meeting in Brussels. She can be pushed off her request and given something completely different from her request, and we're told that trumps anything the UK Parliament does. Well, if you wanted to sum up why 17.4 million people voted the way you did, you couldn't do better than take that example. We do not want this House sidelined or presumed upon. This House should decide when we leave the European Union, and it shouldn't have been settled in that way.
Yeah. Sir Bernard Jack. I do beg the honourable lady's pardon. Angela Eagle and then other colleagues. Angela Eagle. Fewer than 25 minutes to go. Angela Eagle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've seen today elements of the Conservative Party in high dudgeon, or dudgeon, a dudgeon, or maybe they should be in the high dudgeon, but in high dudgeon about the fact that the Minister has brought a statutory instrument before us today to take away the cliff edge that they were relying on plunging this country over in order to get the kind of clean break, catastrophe Brexit that many of them secretly want. And I never thought in this House that I'd sit here and see considerable members of a government party, the party opposite, planning on that basis to cause such damage to our economic prospects and the prospects for prosperity for all of my constituents and everybody else's constituents. It's a period of history that I hoped I would never see. Now, the Prime Minister is entirely responsible for getting all of us into the mess that we've seen develop over the last few months, as she's repeatedly, after putting a definite leaving date onto the face of the original Withdrawal Act, put off the vote and put off the vote on her withdrawal agreement because she wanted, I believe, to face this House with an unpalatable choice between her deal, which many on all sides of the House have serious problems with, and the catastrophe of no deal. Now, in a modern, mature Parliament, I believe that that kind of process and that kind of choice should never be allowed to face us. And whether we voted leave or remain, whichever side of the argument we were on in 2016, we should not have been put in that position. And it was the date on the face of what is now the Withdrawal Act that allowed the Prime Minister to have the leverage that she somehow thought would work to her advantage. She's now been forced to resort to the leverage that we hear happened at the 1922 committee tonight, where she basically said, "Back me so you can then sack me," and gave another date, the 22nd of May, for when she would announce her departure. So now we have, whilst the country's future is still in the air and not decided, the horrible, self-regarding spectacle of the next runners and riders in the Conservative Party to take to see who will inherit the poisoned chalice that the Tory psychodrama of Brexit has injected into the body politic in this country. So I believe that the Minister's SI today is an inevitable consequence of creating a false cliff edge which was put there for blackmail purposes, but which, because there still remain many, many sensible, responsible people on both sides of this House, we have expressed the wish that we will not allow the country to plunge over. And I just want to take this opportunity to say that the Minister is correct to bring the SI, and the Minister is also correct to surmise that this Parliament will not allow the choice to be the catastrophe Brexit of leaving with no deal, and we will not allow this Prime Minister or any future Prime Minister to blackmail this country with those appalling and disrespectful, dangerous tactics. So I support the Minister's SI tonight. I hope that in due course we will be able to perhaps have a much longer delay, start this process again and do it properly with some of the kind of respect that we've seen develop in the indicative votes debate that we've had today, and the cross-party responsible debate that we've seen begin to develop, which we all know should have happened in this country when the Prime Minister crossed the threshold of Downing Street 2 years ago. She's got the process exactly the wrong way round. There's been permanent damage done to our economy, our prospects, our prosperity, and more than anything else, our reputation in the world, because this Prime Minister has got this so disastrously wrong. And I hope that whoever is her successor, they will not take this place as a place that can be blackmailed like she has, and that they will not play Russian roulette with the prosperity and the future of this country. Anyone who decides that that is a reasonable way to behave does not deserve the honour of being our Prime Minister.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Mr. Speaker, I thought the Right Honourable Lady gave the game away when, amid all her hyperbole and rhetoric, she betrayed her desire for a much longer delay. That is what the Remain majority in this House really want. And I was rather shocked to hear the Honourable Member for Greenwich and Woolwich say that this measure should be entirely uncontroversial. He might not have been listening, but certainly millions of our voters have been listening, and they were expecting to leave the EU on the 29th of March. And this debate for them comes as a very great disappointment, because this order cancels exit day for the 29th of March. And the way the Council decision was agreed is exactly why people voted to leave the EU, as my Right Honourable friend for Wokingham set out. History will mark this day as the moment that this House decided to start to turn against the decision to leave the EU and against the mandate upon which most MPs in this House were elected. So far, oh yeah, there are exceptions. I'm talking about the 85% of MPs votes that were cast for pro-Brexit parties.
And so far, the EU's withdrawal agreement has been rejected for good reason, not least because it is so far from taking back control. One point I agree with the Honourable Member for Edinburgh East over our laws, borders and trade. And in fact, if this goes through, that next time the Minister brings an order to this House to implement an EU directive or a decision or a regulation, there will probably have been no minister sitting at the table in Brussels to agree that decision or even to be there to be outvoted. It will just be handed down through the withdrawal agreement. Now, Mr. Speaker, I've never considered myself a populist or a man of the people. But it is only those like me who will vote against this decision to cancel leaving the EU on the 29th of March, who are truly representing what the British people decided in the referendum. We are the real majority in this House, which are so sorely underrepresented by members of this House. I'm going to press on. But this House is now embarked on an unprincipled, this House is now embarked upon an unprincipled constitutional experiment. PACAC, the committee I chair, recently heard from a retired Lord Chief Justice that nothing like this experiment has occurred since the recasting of the role of Parliament since 1688. That is just how radical this experiment is. And I very much recognise the sincerity of many honourable and right honourable members who are involved with that experiment, but they have resorted to the most questionable constitutional methods which leave no government or anyone else accountable for what is being decided. Who will the voters now hold to account for the outcome of the Brexit question? Moreover, this process has been supported by those either embarking upon embellishing the discredited withdrawal agreement with even greater restrictions on our right of national democratic self-determination, or seeking to disrupt or stop Brexit altogether in defiance of the election promises upon which most of us were elected. I regret, therefore, to conclude on these matters, and including on this order, this House of Commons is left with questionable democratic legitimacy. I give way to my right honourable friend.
I absolutely endorse what my honourable friend has said, and to remind those members, including those on our own side, that they voted consistently for the Acts of Parliament to give effect to all the enactments, including the Withdrawal Act, and that to pursue these objectives is effectively to reverse their decisions on absolutely specious and unacceptable grounds.
I agree with my honourable friend, and I will vote against this order. I will vote against this order. Let me say just something briefly about the mess that we are now in. I can fairly claim to be one of the minority in this House who are authors of the voters' referendum decision, and I'm proud of that. Most of us who voted leave have stuck with what we believe one way or the other. We are not authors of what the Remain majority in this House, with the government, have made of Brexit, nor of what they continue to inflict upon our sad and disillusioned voters.
Thank you. Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I can't promise that I'll speak without hesitation, repetition or deviation. I probably won't limit myself to a minute, but I'll do my best on all of those counts. To begin with, I'd like to start by saying that having an extension to the exit day is a good thing. Yeah. For a number of reasons, but the extension that has been asked for and the extension that we are discussing tonight is not the extension that we should be faced with. I want to look back at how we've got into this mess. Now, a number of people have mentioned the fact that people are expecting us to leave on the 29th of March. That is the expected date. When people voted in the June 2016 referendum, not one person mentioned the 29th of March 2019 as exit day, nor did they mention the 12th of April 2019 or the 22nd of May 2019. They voted on a proposition whether they should remain in or leave the EU. That was the proposition. No discussion was had about the actual exit date. The other thing is, while we're on this subject, nobody during that EU referendum expected that Theresa May would be Prime Minister. Sorry, the Prime Minister would be the Prime Minister. They did not expect that the deal that was presented before Parliament would be the deal, because this is not what was discussed during the course of the EU referendum. For anybody to say that this is the settled will of the UK people is absolutely wrong. I give way.
Speaker, can I just remind the Honourable Lady that David Cameron said that if the referendum resulted us leaving, he would trigger Article 50 the day after. He did come, but he didn't do that. He actually resigned.
One of the things about Article 50 is that it is a 2-year period with a possibility of extensions. Tabling Article 50 does not mean that you leave exactly 2 years after Article 50 is put in. There is a negotiation period, and anybody with any ounce of sense would, for a start, not trigger Article 50 until they were in a position where they could negotiate something that Parliament would agree with and that the people would agree with, but also would negotiate extensions on the basis of waiting until they are ready to leave before they actually leave.
The lady for giving way. I must say, Mr. Speaker, I'm not aware of David Cameron ever having said that he would trigger Article 50 the day after. The honourable gentleman shouts from a sedentary position. I just said I'm not aware of it. I'm certainly aware that the Leader of the Opposition said that. Yes. But can I ask the honourable lady, I'm sure she paid a lot of attention to the Leave campaign. Does she remember the Leave campaign making it very clear to the British people that we would not be leaving the European Union before a deal on our future relationship had been secured? And indeed, that absolutely has not been done by this government.
The Right Honourable Lady is, as ever, absolutely correct in this regard. It is the case that people were promised a number of unicorns. It is the case that a number of people on those benches still believe that those unicorns exist and are wandering around waiting for them to emerge in vain. The problem is that those unicorns do not exist. They never existed. They were promises that were made to the people of these islands that could never, ever have been met. I want to discuss the red lines that have been presented along this way. One of the biggest issues that we have with this whole situation is the red lines that have been drawn up and have been adhered to with some kind of iron grip. So there was red lines that were put forward that created the Chequers Agreement. The Chequers Agreement, if anybody sensible had been in Prime Minister's shoes, they would have said the most important thing for our economy is to have a deal that protects services, because that is 80% of the UK economy. But what the Prime Minister did instead was she said, the most important thing for me is cracking down on freedom of movement. So I will do everything that I can in any proposition that I put forward to ensure that freedom of movement is cracked down on, rather than the economy is protected. So that was a ridiculous red line to begin with. The reason that we're in this situation over exit day, and it would be great if the ministers on the front bench could make this clear if there is any summing up at the end of this. The reason that we're in this issue over the exit date is because of the Prime Minister's ridiculous red line about the EU elections. It is absolutely ridiculous that it should be laid down that we refuse to take part in the EU elections. We are ready and willing and able to take part in these EU elections, and I think we would do rather well in those elections, in fact. And I agree with my honourable friend from Edinburgh East that actually UKIP would see a number of votes reduced and a number of seats reduced. And I was a bit shocked to see the member from Vauxhall earlier suggesting that the Labour Party should be courting those UKIP votes and trying to get those people who used to vote UKIP and now vote Labour to stay on board, because frankly there's a lot of those votes that I would rather not have if I was given that option. Now, a number of... I want to talk about the government's lack of preparedness in this. The Secretary of State for Scotland this morning suggested that the Scottish Government had not embraced Brexit and was not therefore prepared for the Prime Minister's deal to happen in the event of Brexit. But the UK government is also not prepared for Brexit. That's why they're having to ask for an extension. Even if the Prime Minister's deal had been approved or was approved this week, they're still not prepared for that Brexit to happen. Mr. Speaker, I sit on the European Statutory Instruments Sifting Committee. The Statutory Instruments Sifting Committee did not meet this Tuesday because there were no proposed negatives for it to discuss. It's not proposed to sit next Tuesday because there are no proposed negatives for it to discuss. I've been asking, does this mean that there are no proposed negatives left? But apparently what it means is that we're not getting a recess, and that in fact this committee will sit the week after and we'll discuss the proposed negatives during that week. The UK government has failed at every opportunity to prepare adequately. It has set absolutely unreasonable red lines. What it should be doing now is going to the EU and saying, we need to have a longer extension so that we can adequately prepare. We are happy to take part in the EU elections as a result. And my preferred position is that we should have a people's vote. So there is a clear option given to the people. They can choose between the option of remaining in the EU or whatever deal this House thinks that it would like to put to them. Yes.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. She's making an excellent speech and summing up brilliantly just the exact guddle that this Conservative government has got itself into. And is it not the case that it's the worst kind of loser that blames its opposition or its opponent for its own mess? And this government is not only completely screwing up the Brexit negotiations and the whole of the UK, but it is asleep at the wheel in government and cannot even replace its disability minister, offending and not properly representing people with disabilities across the UK. It is utterly shameful.
My honourable friend is absolutely correct. This is a complete and total mess. Not just over things like not being able to replace the disability minister. I understand that the Prime Minister has lost 28 ministers. The previous 3 Prime Ministers have reached about a combined total of losing 28 ministers during their time. The last issue that I want to raise, Mr. Speaker, is the issue of the fact that EU settled status is not sorted out. People's jobs, people's livelihoods and people's living standards, people's lives are being put at risk by the decisions and the lack of preparedness by this government. But we will be supporting this SI, we will be supporting the extension, but it should be a longer one.
Thank you. Mark Francois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll try and be brief so that my friend Wantage can get in too. I'll have a go. Sorry.
One also wishes to contribute, so I know that he'll exercise enormous self-denying ordinance. Mark Francois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're debating tonight whether or not to extend Article 50. The thing I'd like to touch on very briefly is whether the EU would ever countenance a further extension. And I say this because from 2007 to 2010, when we were on those benches, I was the party's Shadow Europe Minister. I did the Lisbon Treaty working with William Hague, and that was my epiphany. 14 days in this place, couldn't change a single punctuation mark. That's when I realised we had to leave. But in those 3 years, I hope the Minister will accept, I spent a lot of time visiting the institutions of the European Union because that was my job. And I came to realise that for many people in the EU, particularly, though not exclusively in the Commission, what is often referred to as the European project has the status almost of a religious act of faith. People passionately believe in it, and it transcends almost all other considerations, and it must be promoted almost at all costs and protected almost at all costs. Very many people in the EU were utterly shocked when the UK voted to leave, absolutely stunned, because what we had done in their world was an act of heresy. It was apostasy to leave. And many people believed we should be punished, not least pour encourage les autres. But what they're even more worried about, is the UK taking part in European elections, which would bring 73 UK MEPs into the Parliament, many of whom would be likely to be Eurosceptic, though not all, which would completely upset the calculations that they have made, as it were, to reconfigure the new Parliament in order to keep out what they call the populists from Eastern Europe and, for instance, the Lega Nord from Italy. That is why they wouldn't accept the extension to the 30th of June, They insisted either on the 22nd of May or the 12th of April, which is the drop-dead date for when we'd have to begin European election preparation in the United Kingdom. So my argument, Mr. Speaker, very simply is this. I believe for the EU, protecting the integrity of the Parliament, which under the co-decision procedure under Lisbon has much greater power now relative to the other institutions, would be even more important to those who really believe in the project than trying to keep the United Kingdom in the EU, though many would like that. And therefore, if I'm right, they would not countenance any further extension beyond the dates that have been given, because it would muck up the European Parliament, and from Macron's point of view, that would spoil his plans to federalise the European Union. So my argument, Mr. Speaker, is we shouldn't be worried about a very long extension, because I believe, though I cannot prove it in the House tonight, they'll never grant it. They don't want, under any circumstances, to go beyond the 12th of April, because it means European elections that they simply cannot stomach, because there'd be 35 to 40 Eurosceptic British MEPs that completely rip up their plan for the Parliament. So I believe, yeah, I'm going to finish. I believe on that, I'm going to give one. And I believe on that basis, Mr. Speaker, the threat of a long extension has always been a false one. And if we get to the 12th of April, we can leave. Because I believe that those who believe in the project would not allow the extension. And finally, the government spent £9 million sending a document to every household in this country before the referendum saying this is a once-in-a-generation decision, this is your decision, and we will implement what you decide. If the people in this House overturn that decision, the people will be extremely angry. Don't say you weren't warned.
Is the Right Honourable Gentleman giving way, or has he completed his speech? He's finished. Yeah, well, very good of him to guide me. But in fact, I was going to call Mr. Double and then Mr. Vasey. But no, both of you. Oh, but you can divide it between you.
Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There have been many very good speeches made this evening about the validity of this instrument that we are being asked to vote on tonight. But what I want to talk about very briefly is what I believe what is taking place here tonight looks like to the British people, particularly the 17.4 million people who voted to leave the EU. Because many of the British people have put their trust in this place when we have told them that we will be leaving the EU on the 29th of March in just 2 days' time. And tonight, passing this statutory instrument to delay that date, I believe is a break of trust with the British people who have trusted us, taken us at our word when we said we would be leaving at the end of this month. And I believe that there are many people who are concerned that Brexit is being stolen by the establishment of this place, and the passing of this instrument tonight is another step towards that taking place. But the other thing I would say, Mr. Speaker, is that many people will feel this is wrong for the very reason that has been made many times, that we've been told that we don't have a choice tonight, that the EU have already made this decision for us, that the date we're going to leave is going to be delayed, and it's irrelevant what we do tonight because the decision has already been made, and therefore we should just pass it through. If we wanted an example of why many of the 17.4 million people voted to leave, that is it. It is that this House, any pretence that this House has sovereignty over our own rules. We can't even decide for ourselves the date we're going to leave. We've been told by the EU. We couldn't even get the date that we wanted, that they negotiated away. And therefore, tonight, Mr. Speaker, I will be keeping trust with the word we gave the British people when we said we'd be leaving on the 29th of March, and I will not be supporting the statutory instrument tonight.
Edward Vasey.
Mr. Speaker, everyone on this side of the House has spoken against the statutory instrument. I've just got time to say I fully support it, and I cede my place to the honourable member.
Mr. Speaker, this government has had half the time it took to fight the Second World War. It has had 2/3 of the time it took to fight the First World War. It has had the entire length of the Kennedy administration, in which the groundwork was laid for a successful moonshot. The idea that we need more time is nonsense. They have had plenty of time. They have not used it well enough, and we should just leave.
Mr. Weststreeting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just further to that excellent speech, I would just point out that it took 7 years to organise a 2-week sporting event in the London Olympics. So I think extracting ourselves from the most sophisticated and political economic alliance in the history of the world probably does take a bit longer.
Thank you. Order. Under the standing order, I must now put the question. The question is motion number 4, as on the order paper. As many as are that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Aye. Division! Clear the lobby.
Hello again on BBC Parliament. This is Mark Darcy with Dr Ruth Fox of the Hansard Society. As MPs start filing into the aye and presumably the no lobbies in order to vote on the statutory instrument, the legal instrument that will postpone Brexit Day. The government's been selling this as basically a tidying up formality, but there are enough Conservative MPs bitterly opposed to this statutory instrument that they've forced a division on it, and that's what MPs are up to at the moment. One thing that we haven't had thus far, though, is the result of all those indicative votes that were being held a couple of hours ago. They started at 7 o'clock, they voted until 7:30, and we still don't have the detailed results. Otherwise, Mr. Speaker would presumably have read them out by now. Ruth Fox.
Yes, I think it's going to be the counting behind the scenes. We expect to get the division results on this vote, and then we expect the announcement of the indicative votes after that, I think. But things are a little bit fluid, so we'll have to see.
Well, indeed. So we have two processes going on in parallel. The MPs milling around on your screen at the moment are going to go and have a vote in the traditional manner by filing through the aye and the no lobbies to register their preference on this statutory instrument. And meanwhile, elsewhere, the clerks are busy counting their way through the much more detailed ballot papers on all those Brexit options that we were discussing a couple of hours ago. And then what do we expect to see happen? The drill on previous occasions when we've had big Brexit votes is that when the result is in, the party leaders get up and make points of order. Well, really, their speeches thinly disguised as points of order, giving their reaction to however events have turned out. And I imagine we'll see more of the same when those voting results are announced.
Yes, and I think the interesting thing will be who does the Speaker turn to first. So, Sir Oliver Letwin, as the person who's been leading this process and spoken, shaped the debate at the beginning earlier today, will the Speaker look to him, or will we be looking to the Leader of the House or the Prime Minister? Will they wish to make a statement from the dispatch box? It's all a little bit unclear because we're in uncharted territory with the way this has been done. So we'll have to see what the Speaker does.
Well, indeed, and there'll also be quite a lot to digest in all this. It's entirely possible that it might take the party leaderships on both sides of the chamber quite some time.
Order. The question is motion number 4, as on the order paper. As many as are that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Tellers for the ayes, Mike Freer and Joe Churchill. Tellers for the noes, Mr. Peter Bone and Mr. Philip Hollowbone.
One thing to note there is that there are two absolutely lifelong Brexiteers, Peter Bone and Philip Hollowbone, from the Conservative side, acting as tellers for the noes here, because this is a situation where the government and the official opposition are in agreement. So the normal deal where you'd have the government tellers on one side and the Labour official opposition tellers on the other side doesn't apply this time. The tellers for the noes have to be supplied by the people who are against the motion, who happen to be, for the most part, Conservative Brexiteers. Now, while we have this opportunity to talk as the division unfolds, there have been, of course, a couple of very, very major political developments tonight, most notably that the Prime Minister has announced that if she can get her Brexit deal through in the near future, she will then announce her departure as Prime Minister. And that sets in train an entirely new sort of subplot to the Brexit events.
Yes, I mean it makes for an interesting political period in the if the Prime Minister does indeed or can in the next week or so get her agreement through. She's indicated, I think, that if the agreement doesn't go through, then she'd have to stay on, because we would be looking at potentially a departure in messy circumstances, and she's indicated that there would need to be somebody staying at the helm for that. But if she does get her deal through and she goes, then we'll be into a period of weeks, possibly a few months, where the Conservative Party will have to go through the processes for it selecting a new leader. So she would stay on as Prime Minister until that new leader was selected. So if it's initially, we would see a short list of 2 candidates drawn up by Conservative MPs, rules drawn up by the 1922 committee in consultation.
They'd have a series of ballots working it down to 2, and then those 2 would go to the party membership.
Yeah, so the MPs shortlist, in effect, the two members to go to the party, and then it's a one-member, one-vote election in the party. And how quickly that would be conducted would be a matter for the Conservative Party board to work out.
I suppose part of the Prime Minister's reasoning in announcing her departure was that it might improve the chances of getting her deal across the line. And the argument is that plays in 2 ways. There are Conservative MPs who might be more minded to vote for the Prime Minister's deal if the negotiations for the next phase of Brexit, working out the longer-term trading relationship with the European Union, was then under new management, was not in the hands of Theresa May, but in the hands perhaps of a successor who was someone who had been committed to Brexit all along. Because Theresa May, of course, campaigned for Remain during the referendum, but then said it was her duty to implement Brexit as Prime Minister. But I think a lot of Brexiteers have argued for quite a while now that what they really need is someone who had been committed to the whole Brexit project all along. So that's one side of the coin. On the other side of the coin, there are people who were perhaps more Remain-minded during the referendum, who might now be worried that if Theresa May is succeeded by a hardline Brexiteer, they will get a long-term deal with the European Union that's much less to their liking. So her departure could cut in both directions, and maybe Labour MPs who are Brexit-minded at the moment but want a softer Brexit, if I can use this very simplistic jargon, than a lot of Conservative MPs do, might now be thinking twice about supporting the Prime Minister's deal when they might have supported it before.
Yes, and I think if the Prime Minister is able to whittle down the numbers, then if you are a Labour MP in a heavily Leave constituency, then when you are facing the prospect of voting for the withdrawal agreement, knowing that the Prime Minister was a long way off winning that vote, there was less incentive for you to put your head above the political parapet with all the risks that voting against your own party's line entails, and voting for the deal. But if a number of Labour MPs who are in those heavily Leave seats sense that there's movement in the Prime Minister's direction, they might be willing to do that, and it will need that political shift, because I understand the DUP are still maintaining their position of opposition. But of course the government has got the additional hurdle that it has got to get the Speaker to accept the motion and for another withdrawal agreement vote. And he indicated today he was not minded to do that unless, as per his previous ruling, that the deal that was being brought forward, the motion that was being brought forward, was substantially different to that which the government had brought forward previously.
And this could be quite a serious roadblock for the government, because the Speaker has also indicated that he won't allow motions to, as it were, bypass him, to be put before the Commons. So the idea of what's called in the trade a notwithstanding motion, which would say, notwithstanding what the Speaker has ruled, we're going to do this anyway, would not be in order. He's not allowing the clerks at the table office to accept such a motion to go before the House. So that's a little bit of a problem for the government, to put it mildly. One suggestion is that they could bypass the whole meaningful vote process and just bring in the withdrawal agreement bill, which is a piece of legislation the Speaker wouldn't be able to stop, they argue, and they could, as it were, retrofit into that bill a provision that by the act of passing this bill, you've also fulfilled the requirements of having a meaningful vote. So that there's a kind of cunning way round this, but quite an elaborate and complicated one.
Yes, and obviously then the government, to get that process rolling forward's got to know there's a reasonable chance that there's a sustainable majority to get that bill through the House, because it will require a vote on more than just that issue. So it has to deal with that bit first and then be able to carry the rest of the bill.
Yes, because the withdrawal and implementation bill, which is what we're talking about here, is a very big and complicated and in parts highly controversial piece of legislation in its own right. So it's not a done deal just because the government has a simple majority for the general principle of it. It would have a majority for all the detailed contents.
No, and I think you're going to see, of course, it also has to go to the House of Lords as a piece of legislation. So I think you're going to see, quite a lot of debate and differences and divisions over the constitutional aspects of it, about the powers that will be granted to government, these famous Henry VIII powers that get the politicians very riled up, granting powers to ministers to use statutory instruments that we're watching the division on one tonight, to use statutory instruments to legislate with less scrutiny than you would get with a primary piece of legislation. There's going to be quite a lot, I think, of controversy about the arrangements that are necessary to secure the agreement, to put in place the transitional arrangements when we are outside the EU, but in a transitional period. I think there'll be quite a lot of controversy around the powers that are granted to other bodies that have to make arrangements for the transition period. So Competition and Markets Authority is one where I think people are concerned about the powers that it could get.
All kinds of concerns there, and the timeline is an interesting point too, because there's a certain amount of discussion, listeners may have heard it in the debate that just preceded this, about the possibility of having to have UK elections of MEPs who would go to Strasbourg to represent Britain in the European Parliament if this country hadn't left in time to avoid them. And basically, if Britain was going to have those elections, the European Parliament, the intention to announce European Parliament elections would have to be proclaimed by the 12th of April. The elections themselves would be on Thursday, the 23rd of May. In this country, there might be slight variation in all kinds of other countries, but it's the difficulty that's caused by a new European Parliament taking office that's the real issue in the long term, if Brexit is going to be postponed for a while, because the European Parliament has a crucial role in setting up the new European Commission that would be at the other side of the negotiating table from British negotiators if we wanted some different form of Brexit later on. Talk us through that, Ruth.
Yes, and I think this is going to be an issue, even if the Prime Minister gets the deal and we're into an implementation period, or if we don't have a deal and we're looking for a longer Article 50 extension and possible, more extensive renegotiations. Essentially, there will not be the people in Brussels able to carry out the negotiations for a period. So, the Commission President, Jean-Claude Juncker, will be standing down. There's an opportunity, the first sitting of the European Parliament is the 2nd of July, so there'll be an opportunity at that first plenary session in July to elect the new Commission President. Each of the member states will have to nominate their commissioner designates.
They all have to be rubber stamped by the Parliament as well.
Yes, so we'd be looking at, I think we're looking at sort of September and October for that kind of timeline. And there'll be debate about whether the Commission President, how that emerges through the European elections, because the Commission President is ostensibly nominated by the largest single party, but there is some controversy about that because the candidate that's been put up by the EPP is somebody who's not the most popular candidate.
So expect the traditional sort of spasm of wheeler dealing before a decision is reached and a compromise candidate possibly emerges.
So although he may be the candidate of that group, I think there's possibly the potential for controversy with the European Council not particularly wanting him to emerge. So there'll be quite a lot of political debate going on at that time. It's quite conceivable that we might not have the people in the Commission in place in Brussels to conduct the detailed negotiations.
So
and
all the
reach
people who are on the
agreements until
other
late autumn.
side of the negotiating table would not be there for quite a long time to come.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could be looking at September, October before the other people on the negotiating team at the other side of the table, as you say, are in place. Quickly, a lot can go on behind the scenes with officials, but at a political level, the people may not be in place.
You can only go so far before you can actually come up with an agreement. Well, the Commons chamber is beginning to fill up again. We haven't yet got the tellers standing in front of the table. The division may not be all that far away. Just time, I think, for a quick word about what happens if and when we get the results of these indicative votes. You never know, the counting might still be taking a while. But what sort of things should we be looking out for here? Which options get 250 plus votes, perhaps? Maybe they're the building blocks for some future compromise solution?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first interesting question is: do any of them get a clear majority? Is there a clear way ahead on level of support for any of them, and which ones clearly drop by the wayside, and which I suspect the family of customs union, single market, EFTA options, which ones of those appear to have attracted more support?
So that's the kind of area to look out for, and of course it may not immediately be apparent whether there is actually a sort of mathematics in place that would allow some new solution which could actually muster a full Commons majority to be assembled. That may come over the weekend. It may take even longer than that. It may require another couple of rounds of these indicative votes to get the Commons that far. And by that time, who knows, the government may have got its deal through or moved on its own right.
Yeah.
As we see the Commons chamber beginning to fill up again, the tall figure just coming to the front of the Commons table now is Peter Bone, who's one of the tellers for the noes. His other teller for the noes, Philip Hollowbone, hasn't yet appeared, but I think that may be Mike Freer, the Conservative whip he's chatting to there, just at the end. That's always a sign that a vote is now relatively imminent. Mr. Speaker is in the chair, and the milling around continues. I think that's the Prime Minister coming to take a seat, which I think we might interpret as a sign that there are going to be some indicative vote results as well. Everyone just making room for Theresa May to take her pole position on the government front bench. We will try, incidentally, Ruth Fox and myself, to offer a little bit of comment if an opportunity arrives, but of course the prime purpose of BBC Parliament is to cover the proceedings of the Commons, so if Mr. Speaker moves straight onto the adjournment debate, it might be goodbye from Ruth and myself. And I hope you've enjoyed our coverage this evening. Here's the other teller for the noes. Philip Hollowbone, just in brief conversation with Peter Bone. And all standing behind the table. But now the tellers for the noes are taking their position to, as it were, our left of the speaker, which indicates that they have lost this debate, and the ayes will have it. In due course, we'll get that result and the numbers announced. Interesting to know quite what the numbers are as Joe Churchill, the Conservative whip and the last of the tellers, moves into position.
Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 441. The noes to the left, 105.
The ayes to the right, 441. The noes to the left, 105. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. Order. I will now suspend the House until the outcome of votes on motions. Let me advise the House. Let me advise the House that it was very much the hope of our extremely dedicated professional staff that they would be able to provide the results of the indicative votes to be announced immediately after the result of this division, but that has not proved possible. I don't expect the suspension to be very long, but I will suspend the House until the outcome of votes on motions relating to the United Kingdom's withdrawal from and future relationship with the European Union are available. The division's bell will be rung 2 minutes before the House resumes. Order! Order!
Well, we're still here. The House of Commons has suspended its sitting for the time being. The Speaker saying he doesn't expect this to be a very long delay, but they haven't quite finished counting the results of those indicative votes. But Ruth Fox, that was, I thought, a slightly surprisingly large number of votes in the no lobby there. 105 votes against that statutory instrument to put back the date of Brexit. A bit more than perhaps we expected.
Yeah, I think so. Certainly more than I was expecting. It's said that the European Research Group, the Brexiteers within the Conservative Party, have ranks of around 80. Some say a little more, but around 80. So 105, a bit higher than that, suggests that they've attracted a few more to that side of the, to join them in the lobby.
I'm not quite sure what line the DUP were taking on this vote, and that would be another 10 or so votes right there.
Yeah. So I think if I were the Prime Minister and thinking about next steps, I think I'd be a little bit worried about that as a fairly high number.
Well, indeed. I mean, there are several ways you could look at this. Does this portend a very substantial Conservative vote still holding out against the Prime Minister's deal if she attempts to have another go at that meaningful vote Mark 3 that's being mooted as possible on Friday now, or is this perhaps people who are going to vote for her deal purging their consciences by by showing a bit of token resistance in a vote that they know perfectly well they're not going to win?
Yes, I mean you could make an argument knowing that the opposition is going to vote with the government as a bit of a free hit for those who want to have a go at the government, and they've taken that opportunity this evening. So I know it's worth saying on statutory instruments you can't amend them. It's you can't add things. You can't delete things. It is
it's yes or no.
Yes
and
or
that's
no.
it.
Take it or leave it. So 105 have said this evening that they'd rather leave it. But the government has had its way. The statutory instrument passes. So that brings the UK statute book into line with the international agreement that was reached at the European Council to change the exit day to the 12th of April with the option of extending to the 22nd of May if the withdrawal agreement passes. The meaningful vote on the withdrawal agreement passes.
So we've all got to wait on events, dear boy, events now. So I think for the time being, myself, Mark Darcy, and Dr. Ruth Fox will leave it here. We may or may not get another chance to comment on what's happening depending on what unfolds in the next few minutes, if and when those indicative vote results emerge. But for now, from us both, goodbye. Well, just a reminder as we await the announcement of the results of the indicative votes of all the various options that MPs will be able to consider and vote on this evening. The Speaker has selected option B, proposed by the Conservative John Barron, to leave the EU without a deal on April the 12th. There's option D from another Conservative ex-minister, Nick Bowles, Common Market 2.0 or Norway Plus. Option H from the former Fisheries Minister, George Eustace, Norway option but no customs union. Option J from, amongst others, Ken Clarke, the father of the House, leave the EU but with a customs union. There's option K, as proposed by Jeremy Corbyn, the official Labour policy, customs union plus alignment on future EU rights and regulations. Option L from the SNP's Joanna Cherry, revoke Article 50 in the event of no deal. She was, of course, one of the parties in the court case that demonstrated that the UK had the right to do that. Option M, proposed by the former Foreign Secretary Margaret Beckett, any withdrawal agreement must be put to a second referendum. Option O, finally, from the Conservative and Brexiteer Marcus Fish, Malthouse Plan B. This is a technical solution to the Northern Ireland border problem, alongside a standstill agreement freezing the UK's current relationship with the EU while a new trade deal is negotiated. So those are the different propositions that are before MPs in the House of Commons tonight. We're still waiting, as I say, for the Speaker to return and announce exactly what the voting has been on each of those. And after that, who knows, these may become the building blocks for a further compromise, some further negotiation that produces something that Parliament might, just might, be able to unite around. Ruth Fox.
Yes, so we'll have to see which of these proposals emerge with more support, and then look to see what the position is next week. If the withdrawal agreement doesn't get through on Friday, for example, then we'll be looking to next week, and it's said that we may have another round of these indicative votes probably on Monday, is what's being suggested. We'll have to look to see, do we have a narrowing down of these proposals? Do we have a consolidation of some of them? And do we have a slightly different system to try and, if there's a grouping or a family of fairly similar proposals, for example, do we then start to see a different voting system to try and whittle down the preferences of MPs, to see if they've got something by the middle of next week that commands a reasonable degree of support in the House that the government might take forward, or whether the government says no, we're not working with this process.
And of course, one of the other points to make about this is at the moment merely the temporary interlude, the sort of transitional period between Britain's current EU membership and the longer-term relationship that will be negotiated once the country is across the line and out of the European Union. So that's where we are at the moment, and of course these debates and these options that Parliament is considering may feed into that slightly longer-term debate about the long-term future relationship. We still as yet have no notification or any sign of MPs returning to their chamber. It's all very quiet in the House of Commons just at the moment. We're still waiting to see what those results will be, and there'll be some very interesting number crunching for the experts a little bit later on. But for the meantime, we'll leave you with a picture of the clock in the Commons chamber and the channel music, which many of you have been tweeting about. From me, Mark Darcy, and from Dr. Ruth Fox of the Hansard Society, a final goodbye for tonight.